through it like I did because Michael told me not to read it. He'll read it for me, basically, and for us. There's some ideas that the Irish, from the history would suggest that again we're just closer to that era of antiquity than we all think. Because these people, man, I keep saying we can pass a message around a room and it's going to change by the time it gets to the front of the room if you have 50 people in a room. So people are just remembering things for thousands of years. I can see the Bible and Torah, or if you want to say it that way, being written over a shorter period of time rather than 500 BC all the way. Allegedly, the Talmud was done in 1100 AD. The first publishings in like 1523. Well, who's remembering that all in detail that long? If it's a shorter chronology, then I can see this stuff coming into existence more realistically. Me personally, that's what I had to that's what kind of busted me in my head. Like, oh, the oral traditions across the world would be remembered over shorter periods rather than long, stretched out periods. And then people will get into, well, humans are 200,000 years old, and the out of Africa theory. Now let's look at the fossil record also. And humans are in the top strata anyway. We're not way down deep in the ground. Like, okay, we can talk about all this stuff now, like collectively, and kind of wrap our heads around it and all try to figure it out rather than one person try to figure it out. That's the way the paper is designed. It's designed for, okay, we have arguments here, 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 here. Let's all collectively try to make some sense out of this stuff, sequencing, chronology, Saturn myth, like the whole thing. Here's an outline. Now let's kind of see, this is what we have. Let's see what we can figure out, together, and everybody add bits and pieces to it to kind of make more sense of things. That's kind of the way it's set up. And it was Michael that pushed me to it and was like, you're going to do it, and I'm going to back you to do it so that it's not a finished product, and you're not claiming it's a finished product. You're saying this is what we have. Let's all kind of look at it and collectively work on it, or collectively try to figure it out, rather than one person.
That's such a crucial thing right there. That piece right there. I think that, I think we all have to realize that we're all sort of citizen scientists. We're all, Tess is a great example of that. Tess spends hours and hours and hours busting her ass trying to figure out what the hell, right? And just as we do, everybody does. And so there's this passion that we have behind the work that we've done. Guess what? That's what mainstream science is dealing with, the exact same dilemma. They've spent their whole lives, their entire education careers, their entire professional careers, proposing an idea. Their funding is developed and dependent on these ideas, the foundations of the truths that they've been building. And suddenly someone like, Sean comes along and says, oh, by the way, I'm willing to consider the whole thing is bullshit. There's a whole other paradigm. Well, guess what, guys? That's what we do. We traffic in alternate paradigms. So none of us have the right to defend our own knowledge or our own education, our own experiences, our own science. We have to approach these things from a perspective of hypothesis, theory, potential ideas, visions, dreams, aspirations, goals. These are not facts. Nothing that anybody is talking about here is a fact. It's all a hypothesis. It's all conjecture. It's all a collection of information, and that is it. Anybody who gets their ego involved and this is what's real and this is what's not, and you're going to have to do this and you're going to have to cut that crap out. We are all here to learn, and not a one of us has all the answers. And the last thing I want to hear y'all doing is talking about how somebody's right and somebody's wrong, because not one of you can claim that.
Oh, hell no. Hell no.
I don't know. You're wrong. I think you're wrong. It's really good. No, you're not wrong at all. That is exactly what we do. We are trafficking in new ideas. You're right. And we're trying to make people see that just because your beliefs have led to one conclusion based on one paradigm does not mean that that happens all the time. And, that happens in the same way all the time. It can be a different thought train can lead to a different conclusion, is basically what we're at. And thank you for that introduction to the show. That was very nice. I decided to start early because someone had to wait. So you were just perfect, Sean. Keep going. I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah, keep going and not be spooked out. Not be spooked out. Last thing is, Michael has said nobody in the Thunderbolts group ever has tried to sequence things from the Saturn myth. I'm the one that added the chronology, and he was like, whoa, that's really a heavy undertaking. So, right, this is presented as a work not done, and like, let's all kind of look at this mess.
Sean, did you ever see the one? I posted one in the chat. It was probably a month and a half, 2 months ago. It was about how somebody put together a whole bunch of historical records of eclipses. I have a paper about it. I stumbled onto the information as a result of studying climate change, actually. But, you know, that's how science always is. You're like, oh, I want an answer to this. And you're like, whoops, I've now created 24 more questions instead.
Right.
It often leads you down the appropriate the appropriate path. And while it often answers questions that you didn't even want to freaking ask, it often leads you, you know, those questions are often what leads you to the reality that is the basis of what you're studying in the first place, right?
That reminds me of that thing. It's like when someone pulls off their sock and their foot is on fire, that means it's working. You know, it's the same thing. It's like, I just ask a question and get 20 more questions. That's science. That means it's working.
Yeah, that's a good deal.
Right.
Not necessarily. What they were, the paper that I remember that they were doing, they were trying to figure out by eclipses of the past how the year has altered by a second or this. And what they didn't realize is that the Babylonian eclipses records that they were using in the past to make this, they don't understand or care that
it wasn't just Babylonians, though. It was like about 6 different cultures that were in the stuff, because they had to. The guy that was getting the paper, the guy that was having the work done, he had to hire like 6 different historians and linguistic experts to get the data together to try to even translate the stuff appropriately to figure out when the eclipses allegedly occurred in what cultures at what time versus, you know, where they should be, assuming that the Earth's year is the same as it is now, I think.
Yes, and that's the kind of point. They assume that the year is the same length, and that this minuscule difference will be translated, or they'll figure by the record how close they actually came. When they don't understand that each and every one of those eclipse records has assumptions in it. It's kind of like trying to prove that the length of the year is the length of the year when that's an assumption within it. And so it's circular logic.
Indeed. Yeah, when you base anything on premises that are incorrect, then you get more premises. You know, you get 18 papers that are based on incorrect premises. Now you've got premises upon premises upon premises, and you think that redshift is telling us what galaxies are doing.
Yes. Well, we just saw that just recently, talking about the new revelations of the Gould Belt and all that, so can't argue there.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to steer things toward cosmology. Oh, wait. Yes, I did. Never mind.
Yeah, of course you did. Yeah. Speaking of odd cosmology, we were talking about this too, of how they paint over certain things. Like that image on the screen there is all white. I'm not sharing my screen, so you guys can't see it. So why am I talking to you? Of course. You know what? We're fine.
When you said odd, I thought you were going to say me. My name.
Oh, well, yeah, you are odd. You're certainly not even. All right, so
girl, you ain't no more odd than the rest of us, so don't even start.
But that's not.
There's only one even prime number.
That's not what we were even to. Yeah, there you go. That's not even what we were having a conversation about here. I was watching when we were talking about the new discoveries. This guy, what's his name there? Ancient Architects. He did that thing where he was talking about the constructions inside of the like
Serapeum, yeah.
Yeah, with we were talking about this with the the biological material, the fermentation, and the amazing pressures that you could build, and how they were putting these hermetically sealed containers and putting high amounts of pressure inside of them, therefore bending the or putting electrical stress on the granite, therefore creating a positive negative slide inside of it, which is very interesting an idea. You can only do that with stone. It doesn't work with metals, so we would never see it if we ever work with metals. So, because you need a crystalline structure that's piezoelectric, which metals aren't. So when I'm seeing that they're using stone as a high technology base, or a technological base, and obviously there would have to be metal components to make it and stuff like that. The reason I bring this up, obviously, is we were discussing this prior, but since you're going into this, and Sean, earlier before this started, you were having a wonderful debate on the technology levels and associating that with timelines. So I don't think you should have to necessarily go over it all again, but that was very deep in relationship to this type of thing. So.
He had mentioned
quickly too, because I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Sean.
I'm sorry, because meteoritic iron is also not strong enough to cut diorite. That's already been ruled out. So
what made these
meteorites falling? It's not strong enough to cut diorite.
And you need a lot of
Can't
it.
cut it to this day, because I'm like, shit. You need carburized iron, which in the process, you have more carbon in it. It has to be really hard and steel. So I'm like, that's unless somebody had an old iron carburized piece of steel, like I have this weapon from prior times, and I'm going to use this, and nobody knows. I mean, I'm just speculating, but I think you guys understand.
Well, we speculated that different materials had different properties in ancient times. Maybe there was something that is soft now that could cut through that, as Neil had mentioned before.
Well, as much as I like that, you can't use that as a supposition. As much as I like the idea.
As you see, this coffin was filled with bitumen. So I've heard reports that those sarcophagi in the Serapeum were filled also with bitumen and broken bones, not just a bull. Not just a single bull, but broken bones.
Well, yeah, that's correct. It was just, from my understanding, they interpreted that it was a holy bull thing, but I think they just went, no, what are we not going to eat from this bull? The head, a bunch of other things. Throw in the friggin' eyeballs. It doesn't matter. Throw it in there. Throw a bunch of, entrails and stuff you're never going to use from the bull. Put in your hops and your other stuff, and then let it pressurize. The bacteria will create such a high pressure that you'll need 30 or 40 tons to hold that cover on. Now that's pretty cool.
I think one of the most interesting things about that was the early drawings that were done when these things were first discovered showed huge blocks stacked on top of these sarcophagi, which would imply that they were intending to make sure that the lid didn't blow off. That is obviously an issue of pressure that they were addressing. So this is not hard to extrapolate.
Or from my understanding, the Egyptians mummified everything. What they didn't want to come back to life, they broke their bones and they put them in these bins. It might have been some of these bad animals.
I don't think they needed to be bad. I think any animal would do, wouldn't it?
Well, bad or evil animals described by the ancient American Indians.
Oh, well.
I don't
there
want
it is. There's that picture.
I don't want everybody to forget about the idea that in the universe changing its function, and that the electricity, the characteristic of the metals and stone, softness, hardness, all that stuff is in the air. And I think people really need to take that maybe copper with a certain alloy was tough enough to do these things. So,
even if it could apply to biological materials, maybe we were physically stronger. I mean, there's so many things that could have been different. The idea that human beings lived longer, or that all life was eternal until a certain period of time. That's very crazy stuff. I mean, it's not something that I would necessarily advocate, but there are stories. And if we're going to take one story as gospel, no pun intended, then maybe we should take others.
Or like
Certainly questions worth asking.
Yes.
The Fountain of Youth is supposed to have been an actual place, and that the waters, whatever was in the water at the time, helped people regenerate or last longer or whatever. But it was just a natural kind of thing that happened together. Of course, I've been reading some biological stuff about the human body probably created its own vitamin C in the past. So, you know.
Really?
Thank you. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Don't let me stop you guys, please. I was just going to say to Daniel, hey.
I think it's a really interesting idea that the heaviness of the stones on top of it would probably generate what, electricity, light, what, you know, they were using it for their own intended purposes. And I don't think the ancients had the same different kinds of ideas that we would want, like generating electrical power. They probably use it for other things, maybe preservation. I don't know.
You know what I think, James? I think it was a lightning rod. I think the pyramids were a lightning rod. That the pyramids protected the Egyptians from lightning to the extent that it was directed onto the pyramid. It was collected in the pyramid. I believe that they created a Tesla-like electrical field that was accessed. It's understood that these sarcophagi emitted light, and so that the pyramids were lit from within via the pressure that was created by the contents, because they can't find any soot on the ceilings of these.
I was just going to say that, Duff.
Yeah, but the thing I was going to say is, as the universe changed its function, then these things would no longer work as they had intended to, and that the people who built temples afterwards utilized different ideas, concepts, and purposes for those things to do the things that they wanted to do, which were not the same.
I don't think it's much of a stretch to assume that there was a high level of electrical activity in the atmosphere during the time that the pyramids were created. I think that, that makes sense to me. Yeah, go ahead.
Consider this. I have a different take on why the pyramids are there. To this day, Egypt and that area of Africa receive very, very little lightning strikes. Perhaps they were built to use the energies in the earth to move or to change its electrical potential so that lightning wouldn't come down there anymore in that area.
Well, you have to think, that's a great point, Rick, and you have to think in terms of their own ideology and philosophy. One of their foundational ideas was as above, so below. So they would never think in terms of there being something happening in the sky that wasn't also happening beneath them. It's a foundational idea that you're communicating.
Well, plus they would also hear something and see it at the same time if it was vibrating the ground piezoelectrically. And they might realize by just hearing stuff in the sky and listening to rocks that certain rocks are piezoelectric. They're magic rocks or something like that, like granite. And they use this, just like on the screen here, to pressurize it and to create points of electrical potential, which they could do. That said, there could also be, that they were trying to enhance something that was present naturally in the area that they were trying to enhance. They're also on a river. This river is incredibly long from the center of Africa all the way to the mouth of the Mediterranean, which, if this was just a wire, it's crossing several like 1,000 miles. It could be extremely lethal and you could get potentials from point A to point B, which could occasionally kill you. So it might be best to diffuse that by hooking up things along the river, because you want to live on the river because the river's awesome.
Right.
So,
yep.
To not live in the Nile would be a denial.
Yeah. That's very interesting, wire being an antenna, but the idea that whoever said it was indicating that the pyramid, Rick, was indicating that it was basically a shield. It was shielding the thing, and not only that, but that would shield it from earthquakes, because that's we know from fracking that if you induce pressure on it, it goes like that. So that's a good point, Rick. Thanks.
Also, if you're vibrating too, by the way, if you're vibrating, you'd stop the earthquake entirely. There was an idea that they hummed for a reason.
Well, if they change the electrical potential of the ground in that area to prevent the natural currents from going there and causing storms and earthquakes, then yeah, I could see it, preventing.
I'm not sure they changed anything. I think that they took advantage of the situation. The water beneath the pyramids also is conductive and generative of electricity. This is this.
Well, we know from Tesla. We know from Tesla that
it was a system.
He used the groundwater, the moving
no
electrons.
No talking over each other. Only I get to do that. All right, keep going.
I'm sorry, I don't know who was talking first. But
it's
I do
okay,
have a better
don't worry.
Voice, so
I do have a better voice.
I'm going to go with me on this one.
I was just adding stuff.
Yeah,
it's okay, man. I'm just having fun.
The water beneath is known to have been generative of electricity prior to the understanding of what was going on in the sarcophagus themselves. So this is there's really no doubt that the pyramids were an electrical mechanism of some sort. The purposes of that, what would they do with electricity? Well, what would we do with electricity? Those things aren't hard to figure out. But the reality is,
that's what I do.
They bullshit on Sundays. Just like we do. But the reality is that we don't have all the puzzle pieces, but the evidence is rife that this is an electrical mechanism that they created for their own purposes. It's the fact that the potential that it's a religious structure is really, really, really weak. That there is some mechanism that was happening, and that this was a functional machine of some sort in their era. There's a lot of evidence to support it. It's just I don't know what happened, but there's definitely electricity there, guys.
Well, the thing of it is that if it's that kind of system and it's big enough, and you put enough of them around the world, then you can use it like a telegraph. So, just saying, you can communicate to other people with that way. So, it's just one function.
Think about our cell phone. Our cell phone is a phone, but it's also an information device. We understand that the intrinsic connection between those two things, information and communication, are hand in hand in our culture, and so it wouldn't surprise me if information and communication were also hand in hand in theirs.
Yeah, they
are us after all.
Yeah, the radio is a crystal. The first radio is a crystal, and all the stuff that we have is crystalline stuff. So that's the way it works.
It's also interesting that, is it called the 32nd or 33rd parallel? I think people have drawn lines through the major pyramid structures.
Oh, yes, I saw that from, what's his name? Michael Telliger in the lines.
Yeah. They all kind of line up. And
Daniel is asking.
Placed that way for some sort of reason or another. You know what I mean? Like,
Sorry, Daniel is asking for permissions to post links. You have to make him a mod in the
I do? Okay.
Chat. Yeah, in the live chat.
Very well.
Very well.
I promise I won't use the power for evil.
Sorry, Sean.
Feel free to use it for evil. What evil could you possibly do? Don't show me.
All right, I'll use it for evil or whatever I feel like.
Don't challenge him. He's powerful.
All right, I think you're good now.
I'm not at liberty to discuss my powers.
But he's still a Padawan learner, right? Like we all are.
I'm looking stuff up. Keep going, guys.
I've also try to wrap my head around to look at things being constructed the easiest way possible, not the hardest way possible, too. I kind of been wrapping my brain around ancient people aren't going to do things the hard way. Hey, let's cut these stones over here and travel and take them all the way this way, and let's just do it the hardest way possible. That we're like, how do they do that? I always kind of lean towards the easiest way possible.
We do have to admit that crazy things have happened. For example, and this is important.
Sure.
I didn't know this, but they moved a 1,300-ton stone to put a statue on top of it in Moscow, and it was supposed to be Lenin's statue on a horse or something. And they found out that the rock was too big, but they did manage to get that rock across a river and to Moscow, and it took them an entire year to move it.
They did chip about half of it away.
They did. Once they got there, they had to get not in the process. They realized that the statue, the horse, was going to look tiny on top of this giant rock, so they made the rock smaller because they didn't want to make the horse bigger.
I heard during the movement of the stone, the moving of the stone, they chipped away at it until they got it to Moscow, and it was that size.
I don't think that's exactly how it happened, but because there's pictures of it or drawings of it being moved off of a barge, and it was quite large then. And didn't look anything like the original size. But I'm not going to argue with you. It's just an interesting fact about, yes, we can do strange things.
It's just what I've heard. That's all. I mean, that's.
Well, yeah. I mean, hell, look what I'm putting on the screen. We're talking about computers on grounds and connections to space grids and stuff. Which there's something about him that feels compelling, but all the times I have to take a step back and go, "Whoa, dude," you know. This is
right.
Michael Tellinger.
Yeah, Michael's good, but he's take things. He looks at things from the ET perspective, and wholly the ET perspective, because he's a big follower of Sitchin.
Oh yeah, I never was. I mean, I saw a few PBS things on him, like on VHS tapes or something, and that's all I know him from.
Oh, I was, for many years before I found Symbols of an Alien Sky, I was big on Sitchin and Michael Tellinger. That's how I found the Ubuntu project and all of that.
Really? I just sort of stumbled on them and went, "Oh, that's Ubuntu. That must have something to do with that operating system or something," and I moved on.
No, it's a way of thinking.
I'm with you, Rick. That was part of my initial sort of studies as well. Yeah, Ubuntu and Michael Tellinger. I still think Michael Tellinger is awesome and amazing. Well, I mean, everybody has something to contribute, right?
Thank you.
That's the point.
That's why I'm sitting here with him on the screen and not going, "Hey, this guy, he's full of crap." I actually sat there and went, "Wow," because it's worth going wow to. But you have to also go, now let's be critical. Is this really what he thinks it is? I'm much more inclined to think that there might be something to this more than his worldwide grid idea. Only because we already know that none of those things would stay in the same spot if the world is actually changing. I mean, the Earth.
Speaking of the world, I don't want to mention too much about this. I'll just say that he's changed his view on the shape of the Earth, and not for the better.
Oh my God! Are you trying to tell me he's one of those people that believe in a parabolic Earth? Or the triangle Earth theory?
A banana shaped Earth. Actually.
That's my favorite Earth.
You know it's
the real one, and it's the real truthful one, because it's like a banana. You could hold it with your hand or sort of wrapped around it, because that's what it was made for.
And it tastes yummy.
Oh God!
Is that where your bananas? The image of Neil wrapping his hand around a banana.
Don't think about that,
You're
guy.
so witty, Neil.
Anyways, let's move on.
What was his name? It was Hodges Ham or something that did that, or something. I don't know. He was doing that, trying to make an argument that bananas are made for God is real because bananas are made for our hands. I thought that was quite funny.
Oh, that's clever.
It's nice, and that's why I was
makes it sound less creepy.
No, it's ridiculous.
I know, but that's why I had to make fun of that.
It's literally masturbation, literally, figuratively, and literally masturbation.
Tell us how you really.
Have you guys ever heard of? Like I'm capable of anything else. Have you guys ever heard of Eric Weinstein?
I guess not.
Was that the guy that got banned from a college because he refused to say gender pronouns or something like that?
I heard of Eric Weinstein.
You're thinking of Peterson.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Okay, well, he's a mathematician. He's a mathematical physicist. He's the managing director of Thiel Capital, Peter Thiel's personal investment firm since 2015. He's written on investments, capitalism, science, and mathematics. He has an interesting interest base. He just started his own podcast, and his podcast is all about like our institutions, our education and our science and our math, and all of our great institutions have been hijacked and filled with propaganda and deceptive sort of ideologies that retard and extinguish science and progress for humanity at large.
Ideologies or philosophies?
He was one of the guys who was writing fake papers, wasn't he? He was writing fake papers with ridiculous data.
I don't know much about him. My point is this: he's the low-hanging fruit to the extent that this guy is talking about the problem without a solution. He's talking about the same problems that we've all discovered, which is the mainstream has been hijacked. Mainstream medicine, mainstream academia, mainstream science, all been hijacked. He knows this and says it, and he's a rich guy. I think it's fascinating that people in the mainstream, finance people, really smart people all over are starting to understand the reality that we've been lied to, we've been deceived, and our science is a failure. That there is that dark black matter and dark holes and all this other crap are just dead ends. There's no future there. And he gets it and he says it, but he has no idea about electric universe theory. These are the kinds of people I think that that we should reach out to, that we should be communicating with, because this guy sees the problem but doesn't see the solution. And I think that's a profile that I think is really interesting.
I agreed. I've studied the gentleman that you're talking about, and he was on Joe Rogan, and he started talking about the secret to everything. So I argue with you, he does have a solution, and his solution is hop vibrations, HOPF vibrations with the fibrations, and these are nested. This is exactly what the electric view is talking about too, and the same geometry that we were talking about. Eric Lerner's model of a plasmoid, the galactic center, active galactic nuclei being a plasmoid. So he is aware of this stuff, and they even talked about some of the on that episode, some of the catastrophism that's going on, and then they scoffed at the electric universe, as far as I remember. I think unless it was a different episode. Yeah,
I didn't see the Joe Rogan interview, but but it's on my list of things to watch. But I have seen his own little podcasts and his interviews with other people, and his ideologies are I don't know. It's just it's that profile of a human being who sees the problem but doesn't have the answer that I have. I guess he has his own answers. But I just wonder, like, how hard would it be? Do you think that
you'd have to approach them without a belief? We don't do ourselves any favors when we have, and let's be fair, when someone comes in and says, well, I have a belief. Well, and that guides me. That scares a lot of people. And I'm okay with people having beliefs because obviously the belief in materialism, the belief in scientism has guided so many. The belief in Star Trek has guided people, okay? So let's not pretend that it doesn't have an influence, but let's not...
and the Force. Don't forget the Force.
Agreed. May the Force be equal to mass times acceleration. So, anyway.
The leaders, the influence,
science nerd,
people who have the ability to influence, definitely would see that the vested interests have the materialistic ideology or belief system.
Even unconsciously, yes. It's not something you know.
That's what he says.
It's just the world.
Solutions. Yeah. It's just what everybody believes, but he understands that they're all false principles. None of them are true, and that science would hold on to false principles, or the organization of science would hold on to false principles.
That's what Sheldrake says. Yeah,
knowingly. Yeah. Sheldrake is a perfect example. He puts out, hey, look, all these 7 things are false, and they go, oh, sorry, we believe in them.
And we believe them, and we're not going to change. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
These are demonstrably false. So what?
And the vested interest of society, those who have advantage don't want to change those things because they would then lose the advantage. And they don't want newcomers to come in and take over.
Some people think it's nefarious. That's where your intention is. And I want to stress that some people might know, but there's a ton of people who have no idea. They're going to be, and rightfully so. They could even be the president of a faculty. Okay, they could be running an entire thing. They're keeping their life. But when you present these things that Sheldrake does, where he goes, here's a science delusion. These things are all beliefs. The speed of light is changing. This is changing. That's changing. We don't know what mass and matter even mean. We're talking at our ass about a whole whack of things, and he just goes like this. When you do that to somebody, you just grabbed the intellectual floor out from underneath them, or the rug out from underneath them, and watch them just sort of flail. Their mind they're suddenly up in the air with their legs spread, still in mid-fall, but then they quickly build themselves back to a safe spot to stand on, and it goes back to their old beliefs, and that's where they land. It's very hard to get them to comfortably sit there in, I have no idea what the truth is, to set someone then go, okay, now that you're in this state, I can now introduce you to, but what if everything is connected? Well, did you hear about, you know about the force of electricity, coulombs and so forth. Let me explain to you this, and blah, blah, blah. Now, that could be a way in for somebody, and I have never taken that approach. Most of the time, I'm either coming in from mythology, because people know it, or I build up from the dinosaurs through geology, or I build from space and stars and talk about the ionosphere until they realize, oh, they're just throwing metal ships through an electric field. Yeah, and that's why they explode. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I know this is some hard for people to grasp, but there's always a different approach to people. They believe this stuff genuinely. There are nefarious people that
they're unconscious beliefs as well. I mean, they're unconscious beliefs that everything's dead. Most people, if you talk to them and say, oh, do you believe you're dead? No, of course not. But unconsciously, that's what they're operating off of.
Yeah, it's just cells that might be alive, but they're made of dead things. Each individual dead thing, yeah.
The two-slit
double slit experiment. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing is built on not irony. What do they call that? It's illogical. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I would call it asinine, but please go on. I know there's a term for it.
But it's a thing in science that says this should not
a logical fallacy, a enigma.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
One of those.
Anyway,
things.
it's built on illogic. It's telling you that what you're looking at, how you're looking at, is wrong. If you get a double slit and you don't know how that works, the analogy is wrong. You're looking at it in a different way, or you're using some way to tell. It's telling you that you're looking at it wrong. But their solution to this thing is to make it infinitely more complex
than it has to be. Correct.
Yeah, and
Schrodinger argued with this.
Yeah, Fermi, or what's this guy?
Fermi?
This guy, Fermi, whatever his name is. He decided to make this infinitely complex going inside. So it's not just 2, but it's an infinite number coming in. And then he does the funnel thing he does a double thing on it, and he says it all comes infinitely into one thing. And it comes out that this 2 sophisticated things, these 2 infinite things, or a funnel going in and out, or I mean coming to one result, is that it comes down to the path of the particle or whatever is going to the least resistance. That's all that is. They're making this totally crazy, unnecessary just crazy stuff.
Well, to explain the problem, yes. If anyone understands the problem, the double slit experiment basically has two slits, and one slit is they shoot one photon, but it seems to distort the direction no matter if they only send quote unquote one photon. Now, again, as James was saying, if you are looking at this from the situation of a wave that has itself a field that is self-interacting, then this photon actually goes through both slits, because part of it goes through one and part of it goes through the other, because it's not just one object, it's a field. In fact, that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. It's like blowing a smoke ring. That's basically what the light is. It's a torus ring going flying through space, in a sense. And you can see how that would interfere with itself if you had a fence with two holes in it that you were shooting it at. Some air would go through one hole and some through the other.
Yeah, but their brilliance, the way that they get out of their problem
is in the perception and blame.
More sophisticated.
Yes, they blame the observer.
Yeah, and it comes down to the path of least resistance. That doesn't need infinitely amount of incomes and one outcome on an infinite level. They're using two infinities to they're making things sophisticated, and they're feeling sophisticated. They think that a simplistic thing that something goes through the path of least resistance has to be complicated. No,
the simplest things that we ignore are what's important. For example, why did the apple hit the ground and not fly into space? That's a good friggin' question. We should be answering, for example, looking at the screen right now. Tell me, is this a star to you? Does that look like a black hole? Go piss off, okay? Because look at this thing. I can look over the right there and see an actual, like, double layer right there. And look at the strings going through this thing. It's so beautiful. This is, whatever they're thinking this is certainly not it. Look at that. I mean, and look at what they're trying to say.
They're making complications a requirement of science.
Yes, because it holds their superiority, their, as you said, ego in check. No one can possibly debate how awesome this math is, because no, your math is only good if it's actually solving a real problem. If it's not real, then you're just making stuff up. Like
that we make it simple. If we make it simple,
it should be simple.
Then we're Bible thumpers or something. That we're unsophisticated yahoos that can't understand anything, and they're the only ones who can understand this nonsense that they create.
Well, it's the same thing. Certain parts of it. Just one second. Certain parts of this are simple. You're right. Like, I'm just talking about laws of physics or whatever in relatively simple terms. But just to say that there's only 4 laws and some basic physics going on out there in this picture really does no justification for the multiple things that are actually happening, obviously. And basically, even though it's simple, the world is actually more complex. The universe is more complex than you think it is, which is an odd dichotomy to say. It's basically...
It is.
It's basically, right. Please, no, mathematically describe to me the forces that are making this fire work. Go ahead. Have fun. You can't do that.
So but
even though you know the rules,
such an important
you can't.
Point.
Unless you have like a way more supercomputer than that, like it'd be easier just to make the fire.
The functional result of people growing up under this kind of system is disassociation. For me, following Neil deGrasse Tyson, following, I used to think, what's his name, the dude in the wheelchair, was one of my personal heroes. What happens is when you start to read and to understand the science, you begin to realize, I'm either not smart enough to understand this, or it's bullshit. And one thing I know about myself is I'm not stupid. But every single time I tried to read a scientific paper about black holes, and because Walt Disney did a movie about black holes. Like, this is, I have access to this. I want to learn and I want to discover these things just like I have my whole life. What did I come to? What did me and millions of other young people like me come to? Science is too hard. Science is too complicated. Don't worry. Don't worry your pretty little head. Just sort of accept the reality that these things are all happening, and it's not possible for you to understand. Well, guess what? I started reading like critique papers before I ever knew electric universe existed. People are going, actual scientists were saying, this can't be, this isn't that, we can't just live in a world where things are more complicated than we have the capacity to understand. We're just to accept the reality of nuons and luons and eons and boons and freons and all these other things that they create to explain things that they have no explanation for. And after a while, to me, in my own mind, the whole system just toppled, because I realized what I said initially is it's not me that's not smart enough to understand. This shit is not knowable. And so just because the electric universe is knowable doesn't mean it's right. It just means it's a foundation that we can work from. We're now, what the electric universe theory gives us is foundational tools that we can build something with. We can build something stupid, we can build something evil, or we can build something for all humanity. The reality is now we've got the tools. What are we going to do with them? The other tools, the dark matter, is a useless tool. There's no purpose for it. All it is it's like God. It's a bucket where you put things you don't understand. And we can't have that. We have to understand that a whole generation of people have been turned off to science because we've been told, like the ancient priests told the Christians, the Bible isn't knowable. You don't worry your pretty little head. You just show up and tithe on Sunday. We'll explain the Bible to you. You don't need to read. It's the same thing in science today. You don't need to understand what dark matter is. You just have to understand that it exists and accept that reality and move on. Well, that's not how human progress occurs.
Yeah, and the consensus itself is made up of mostly followers, and so you cannot outnumber them. And you have to simply take Sheldrake stuff, give it to them. They accept it or not, go on, move on, and work with those people who can accept reality rather than those who want to be led by those who they think are better than themselves. So.
Also, if you would like to begin to tithe to the Electric View, please feel free. We don't mind. We take credit cards. but we're not a church. We're not a church.
Can I ask a question for you guys to answer? Can you guys answer?
I think Daniel wanted to talk as well, but go ahead.
It came up in another group the other day. If plasma cosmology was correct, then why doesn't it? That science would overturn the gravitational theory based on the plasma cosmology, and I was like, it just doesn't work that way.
No.
Listen to what you're saying. So I want you to elaborate on that, because the guy was dealing with the other day. It's like, here are the peer reviews. Here's how the IEEE peer reviews. Now here it is. Now he hasn't gotten back to me, but he had made the statement. If plasma cosmology was correct, it would already be over. The theory would already be overturned.
That's how science works in a computer, but that's not how it works in real life. People have this belief, and it's a real big belief that scientists are actually going to do the right thing. And it's like politicians. They're going to do the right thing. Now, I've lived trying to do the right thing. When I was younger, you're like, oh no, this is the right thing. Now, when I get older, I realize the right thing was not the right thing. I was an idiot back then. I should have been, this is the right thing. But that's just growing up, learning wisdom. What is the right thing? Who's more important? The little guy or the big guy? Why am I supposed to protect them when I should be protecting them, type of thing. Now, putting that all into context about our shared humanity and so forth, seeing that nuance, the same thing must occur with being told all the time that plasma cosmology, that the sort of the relativity is real. And when you hear the story of the gravity and stuff, you're okay with that. Like, I was fine with that. The trouble is that also people like to say, no, everything's electric. Just somebody said, no, the apple is falling to the ground because it's electrically attracted. Is that correct? No. Gravity is a real force. No one in plasma cosmology is denying gravity. However, gravity is just incredibly weak compared to, the fastest it can pull me through the atmosphere is 120 miles an hour if I'm falling. That's it. if I get low enough to the ground, because it's slowing me down. That's how thick the atmosphere is. But that's not a lot of force, really.
It's the sudden stop that gets you.
But
I'm glad you said that, Neil. I'm glad you said that, because then on a discussion last night, and we do it in real time on live video chats, a guy did do some research, and he said it seems like the electric universe could become dogmatic, because then people will say, well, everything's electric, everything. And I said, I don't disagree with you. I said, I don't disagree with you there, because that's correct. You know, it's just that we're not in science in real time to where it's like, eureka, let's move this move this over. It just doesn't work that way.
No. Let me tell you where we're at. Okay, we're right before we're in the 1950s something. Okay, Einstein just dies in 1955. Okay, and then in 66, well, in 63, you get Doctor Who coming out. And in 66, you have Star Trek coming out. Now, both of those had their own predecessors, of course, but that was in the air. The idea, I mean, Kennedy made a speech in 61, we're going to the friggin' moon. Okay, so all of this, the cars even had space fins on them, for frig's sakes. So they had an idea, a dream or something that they were conveying to each other way back then with this idea. Now, the trouble is it changed everything, because they were like, space, we can break atoms. You know what we could do? We can fold space. There's multiple dimensions, and suddenly that all spawned out of that subspace, hyperspace. All the cool poltergeist things became real again, because ghosts became real. Black holes, all that shit. Which, by the way, is a later
subspace.
Yeah. Yes,
anything but subspace.
And that's layers and layers ahead of where you end up at. Which, of course, this is all garbage. But all of that led to multiple timelines. Which, by the way, all of this is great for storytelling, and everybody already knew it. It was like ingrained. Like, you had a bunch of farmers that came home from the war, and suddenly they were going, because of our war effort, we have a bunch of other new cool shit. Here's some Teflon, here's some stuff. This thing can blow shit up, but here's a bunch of stuff we're going to send to the moon. Here's what we're going to do. Thank you all for your service, blah, blah, blah. Keep working, because we need that wartime thing to keep going. Now, they're doing this thing. They have this wonderful culture going, and it has everyone's making money, but because everyone's developing new things. But this is the issue, that it didn't continue like that, number one. And number two, that's not reality, because they were dreaming of something that and all of this was in their fucking heads in a lot of cases. It led to a lot of things. Now, this is the same argument then that could be say it can get dogmatic. Well, we already are dogmatic. So let's leave that and accept that both of them can be dogmatic. So can the preachings of Jesus Christ, probably the nicest guy that ever walked the earth, if he even did walk the earth. No matter what, his words were, hey, don't be dicks. It's cool, man. Be cool. Later on, we turned it into Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with Einstein, basically, because it's the same friggin' story. But anyway, well, maybe not the same friggin' story, but you know what I mean. So here we are looking at this. Right. Yeah, exactly. But you see where they had, that could be corrupt. So here we are. Everything could be corrupted and could be turned into something bad. So let's accept that could be a part of human nature then. But the truth is that people are going to say, everything's electric. It's all electric. Oh, this could, I mean, it's just, well, if that's going to lead you to new ideas, that's okay. That doesn't mean that I have to believe you're allowed to think that. It's not. Gravity is real. It's a real force. What Wall is saying is something must be managing that force, and he's likely correct. There is a mitigating force with the tails of the planet. We exchange charges. We balance out. This seems to be incredibly stable for the last 2,700 years or so. Seems to be. I don't know about comets, but I'm definitely telling you.
But we can take that premise down to the atomic and say what holds atoms, what binds atoms together, and what holds them apart.
Yes.
The electrical forces.
There could be something much simpler, which I agree with. If we go with certain models, we can throw away so much crap and just go. It's like the epicycles. All of subatomic stuff right now feels like epicycles to me. Just extra shit piled on top because you don't see the truth of it. And when you see the truth of it,
well,
it's
I'm talking
be...
atomic, not a subatomic, right?
No, but it doesn't make any difference. I mean, once you go beyond molecular, I guess. The point is that just like all it took was Edwin to go, I'm going to put these balls together, okay, and see what happens. Did no one ever do this before? Like, did no one clue in to how easy this is?
You're talking about
Yes,
Sam,
I am.
Right?
Yeah, Sam, structured atom model.
Yes, I am, Sam.
he is right on the money, and that's the type of simplicity, just like the apple falling. That's what we're looking for. That type of re-envisioning. When you realize that the shapes that he's constructing makes them go into certain. That's why they bond at those particular points. And that's how they bond, because you can only pack them in so tightly. Once you get so big, that's the maximum you could ever make an atom, because it's not connected very tightly. It will fly apart, which makes it ionically radioactive. So simple. It doesn't take a genius to figure out. Why are we even, like, it's almost ignorant to not look at it at this point. You'd have to have your blinders straight on. And this is what I'm looking at here when I look at some of the stuff. Now, I can see that as being nefarious, but I can see it as people protecting their ego. They're scared of someone who comes from nothing going, yeah, I have like a master's degree in chemical engineering, and I'm going to kick your friggin' ass, Doc. And here comes Neil Thompson with something. What does he just like hearing his voice? Well, maybe I do a little bit, and I hope you do too. But that doesn't mean that I'm not telling you the truth here. At least this is how human beings are. And this is what I'm looking at when I see plasma cosmology versus conventional. Eventually, if you're being honest with yourself, and everyone in this channel is going to tell more people and go, just be honest, take a look at it. It's not something that's going to bite your head off. Be okay to step from one reality to another. The trouble is that reality is only in your head. Nothing changes outside. The planets are still revolving. The only difference is, you know that time frame that said all the disasters were millions of years ago and all the really, really, really bad things about the sun eating our entire planet are billions of years in the future? Yeah, we don't know that for sure. They could be just full of shit. That's basically it.
I think Neil's voice is dreamy. And also, I would say that I don't see any evidence of lensing, an indication that the term mass indicates a distortion of, quote, space-time.
Well, you'd see it in this picture.
I just don't see it. Where is all the lensing? I mean, we see quasars and blazars and pulsars and neutron stars, but we only see lensing in very, very specific things, which, by the way, doesn't look like lensing.
No.
So, if you really want to tie up a knot in a physics class, you're not like, go to a community college and take a physics class, one where you don't care if your peers are going to try to murder you, because the way you lead the class into the what is mass question for that professor, teacher, whatever it might be. Because when you go down the road of, hey, physics teacher, what is mass? You're not going to get an answer, but you're going to get that ledge being built that you were talking about earlier, where he needs to build himself back into, oh, mass is just a distortion of space-time. And by the way, if the Parker Solar Probe isn't measuring time dilation while it's traveling 244,000 miles per hour, time dilation's not real either.
There you go.
Yeah, the unconscious things that people, as a herd group, hold on are really what's holding things back as far as that is concerned. And all organizations, even science, is held up by herd dynamics, and the consensus of the followers are there only to hold on to the privilege of the leadership to determine when change occurs. And
Yep.
it's true of any organization. Science is not immune. It's not going to be changing anytime soon, because the followers just outmass us. We can't get to. We can't step on the leadership's toes and say, face reality. This is, Sheldrick's right. Get over it. and they just will not do that because the vested interests have the budgets. And those organizations, science and established in particular, are dependent upon those budgets. And that's where they sense their sense of power is. And if they say something's not true anymore and everybody else doesn't go along with them, they get thrown out. They lose their power. They lose everything.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to this is not going to be an easy fight. We have to infiltrate. We have to dominate. We have to bash them with the truth.
Somebody
I'm not talking about.
I can't. I'm way too honest. This is my attack on them. Hey guys, come on my show and argue with me anytime you want.
Well, you obviously haven't read Sun Tzu, but
I know everyone tells me that. Like, I mean, you guys are all like seeing. I mean, but you know what? I have people who I've had situations where there's been like people wanted to try to make something. I'm like, I'll support you and I will support the evidence and I want to make specials. I have like all these wonderful things that we want to put together, but it's a community that does this, not just one person. I hope that every single person here is eventually going out and making their own YouTube channels with everybody and getting more things going or that type of thing. I mean, if we're at the point that they want to attack YouTube, speaking of which, I heard that Dutch Sense or Dutch Ins, whatever that guy's name is that attacks with suspicious observers that go back and forth all the time, that he got kicked off YouTube.
Yeah, the earthquake guy.
Yeah. I don't know. Tell me. I don't know. I heard he got kicked off YouTube. Did you say
Dutch Sense got kicked off of YouTube?
Yeah.
Nah. Really?
Well, that's what Heather said. And,
oh boy! Well, I don't know.
Well, type him in. I don't even know how to find his page. I'm not trying to be rude. I just know of him vicariously, I guess.
It's DUTCHSINSE, I believe.
Hey, I have a question as well.
I think he's on Twitch.
Regarding Neil, is Neil Creamer okay, guys?
He should be. Why?
Well, I heard that he died, and I did not hear any confirmation on that. And there's no evidence that he's passed away on his Facebook page.
Don't say that.
Someone in a text said that he's passed away.
No, I just hung out with him in July.
Well, he left the chat. That's what brought up the conversation, and
right.
Pi said she found an obituary. So.
Okay,
I didn't.
You know what? If he's on here, someone's going to be like freaking out. Okay, because I don't know for sure.
No, he left the Skype a little while back.
He can. People do that.
Well, I'm not suggesting he did die. I'm trying to dispel a rumor.
Oh, thank God! You're giving me a friggin' heart attack.
Yes, we're trying to find out what the story is.
Well, great. We just started a rumor across the friggin' internet right there. I just messaged him this morning, says Heather. Oh, thank God. Okay. Now that we're here, I heard from him a few minutes ago. There, he's not dead.
Oh, okay, thank God.
Thank you.
Or is Dutch Sense
Thanks,
gone?
Heather.
Or is he talking about Dutch Sense? I don't know. I hope he's talking about Neil. Anyway, okay, so let's just not panic. Whew. God, your heart attack now. Where was I? I'm sorry. We were talking about going to Atlantis or Heather, something much happier.
Neil, just before that, Heather said they took all his stuff down. Who's they?
Dutch.
And okay. Oh, okay.
This guy. Or him.
So what's his gig?
Doesn't have any content. See. He
goes around and around the world looking at all the earthquakes constantly for hours and hours every day, just looking at this earthquake, then that earthquake, then this earthquake, and that earthquake.
I'm not sure why they take him offline. Usually, however,
is there a political component to his work?
Well, no, I don't think so.
I don't know. He was running into problems forever. Like, we watched his channel for a little while, but then I kind of just determined that he's just reading a list of earthquakes and then looking at geographic locations and going, look, earthquakes were there.
Is this the fella that developed the earthquake app for your phone?
No, that's Ben.
That's Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure Dutch Sense is still going to be on Twitch, so even if his YouTube channel gets deleted, You can probably find him on Twitch. I know he was initially like if a sudden earthquake, if a bunch of earthquakes suddenly kick off, he'll go live on Twitch, and he uploads his videos afterwards to YouTube because he ran into all kinds of issues with, I don't know if it's demonetization or getting banned or what the deal was, but I know he ran into all kinds of issues, and so he eventually moved the whole operation over to Twitch Live. So I think he still does upload the videos to YouTube, but they're like 2 hours old because they're like usually 2 hours long.
I just went to his channel. There's nothing there.
Don't quote me on it, but that's my take.
Anyway, that's I have nothing wrong with. It's just odd. So maybe did he might have. Oh, he removed it from YouTube himself. Okay. Has been threatened. Something happened 5 days ago. Well, see, that's a lot of drama right there.
I know he's had many different issues with going back and forth with the USGS. So I know there's been some tweet battles that go on.
Yeah, that's not a good game to play. He claims he can
predict earthquakes. Yeah, he claims he can predict earthquakes, and he's gotten into issues with Ben Davidson as well as USGS, where everybody claims they can predict earthquakes and everybody else claims they can't. That's about all I know about it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. One of the issues that we have with this is it's like dowsing. When people say it's, this is dowsing's real. Well, it might be real, but it requires a human being. So it's an art. A human being is required for an art form. Computers don't do art.
Yeah, it's like reading a crystal ball at that point.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. You might be able to divine something, and I might trust your instincts. Like, you've lived here for 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, 100 years. Okay, and you're going to tell me what the weather is going to be. I'll trust your opinion, because you've lived here.
Yeah.
But
is it science? Can I teach you to do it? Can I repeat? Can I
get a computer to do it? Can I get a computer to look at a bunch of information and make the same calculation you did? Now that's the trick, because you have to know what data are you just guessing here in the middle. And that's kind of the same feeling I have about subatomics, by the way, when we're talking about gluons and gluons and all that bullshit in there. Because I'm like, you guys are making this way worse than it has to be. But you have to get a feeling of why this happens before you can come up with And I understand that. So
you get to the point where you're like, yeah, okay, I have a model here. It's there's input going in, there's output coming out. But is there any meaning to it? Is there predictive value? Does the model make any sense at all?
This exact argument became an issue.
Does it have messed up? No, you get garbage out. Like, you know how to write programs, right?
Well,
garbage in, garbage out, right?
But what I was saying is that this argument was actually done before, and it was done because of a philosophy problem. And the philosophy problem was that all motions in the heavens are circular, and all motions on the earth are linear and go in straight lines. This was the philosophy of the time. Earthly motion is straight lines, and celestial motions is in circles. So gods are in circles.
The bicycle was invented, Neil.
Yes, it was much longer before the bicycle was invented. However,
I just want to add that when you're
I'm in the middle of a story. Shush.
Oh, sorry.
Now, in the middle of this story, the problem is that they were trying to figure out how to hit people with their new toys called cannons. Before, it was just use a bow and arrow, and you didn't have to actually figure it out. You just figure it out by shooting a bunch of arrows until you got it good enough that you could hit something with it. And that's just muscle memory. There's no calculations. But now you have powder charges and angles. And the trouble is that the ball would go through the air in a straight line and then drop off. And it would curve. So it was a combination of circular motion and straight lines. This became a problem. They had to figure out a new math to do that. Well, they did, obviously. And they learned how much powder can blast this ball that weighs this much from where it's going to land. So that determination, that calculation, those ideas are where you see the application of something moving from art to science in a way. I know it's gunpowder, but now I'm done.
And yeah, you're like, that's an issue. You're like, what am I measuring? can I get a real world result from this? Is there a predictive value that is repeatable here, right? So you're shooting a cannonball. Okay, you have this much powder. It was made this way. Here's the parabola, and so on. That's real world stuff. High mass reaches an infinite amount here at a singularity at a black hole. Let's go search for observations. That's fake world science.
Well, and Piers, what's his name? Corbin. He follows almanacs and makes predictions based off of those. Plus, he does his own calculations because he's obviously into meteorology. He is quite accurate. They call him crazy, but he's just using the information that's been there forever. Now, is that a science? Well, he has to interpret it. So can't be necessarily a science, but it's sunspots. No, I'm not arguing with any of that. I don't really know. I recognize my ignorance in that field, so I don't want to be I don't want to say that he's like. I believe that he knows what he's talking about, and I'm sure that his science, like when he goes, no, take a look at this, take a look at this. It's like Velikovsky going through the records. I mean, you can't deny they're there.
Oh, yeah.
So there's something to
that. That guy knows his stuff, but the almanac data by itself is just a sunspot cycle. He's getting a much more accurate thing than the almanac.
By the way, everyone who's looking at that thing on the side of my screen, that's the storm outside. So if you see like things falling and stuff, just let me know because I'm not looking that direction.
It doesn't matter, Neil, because the plasma ball's not on, so I don't care.
It actually is on.
Oh, it is?
You just can't see it because it's so friggin' bright.
Oh, wow.
The weather's so bad it looks like a skull outside your place.
Quickly going back to the quantum, if I may.
Of course.
The scientists that are looking at the quantum realm, they don't understand it, and they express it in waveform patterns, in patterns like frequency patterns that you see in sand. That's how they understand quarks and muons and all of that. They're expressed in these wave patterns, not in any. Yeah, it's still alive. Yeah, but yeah, that's how it's done. They don't see particles, they see these waves and these patterns that they say must be created by this particle.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
it's waves upon waves. It's just waves that are repelling other waves and creating interference patterns and deflecting other waves.
Frequencies and resonances, and
there's no predictive value or usefulness to any of that because how are you going to make an aspirin out of a bunch of waves? It's totally irrelevant. You need to use information that's.
And we're not just talking about one type. We're not just talking about one type of energy. We're talking about multiple types of energies down there in the quantum, doing their certain things to structure certain things. So yeah.
Talking about the forecasting, the earthquakes particularly, that definitely is an art, and. There are people who are good at it, and probably we should listen to those particular individuals much more than anybody else. But the divination for water, that in fact works, and Sheldrake's kind of work proves those kinds of things. There are people who are good healers, and there are people who are good diviners, and they're not the usual guy. But they work, and more than 50%, which is a provable
statistical
thesis.
Issue. Yeah,
yeah, it proves that they are capable, sensitive somehow, some way to that, and yeah.
That's a perfect example of where you find a bunch of statistics that can't be ignored. Now you have to go over and see, okay, can this be replicated by others? But that's just statistics. That's an analysis that shows that there is an effect. This is how medicine works. Like that's it. But it is still, they call it's the science of medicine contains scientific parts. And they would say that is science. Sure. But that's also the sort of the frying pan theory. If we're really good at, if you have a problem, you just bonk them on the head. And 50% of the time that works. But that doesn't necessarily tell me why that works. And That's
the same thing as for medicine, is because the placebo effect. If you believe that it will work, it's more likely it will. You will
actually. There's
heal
been
yourself.
evidence of those. What are they called? There's killers, assassins that were from a particular tribe, and people believed if they got pointed by them that they would die. And when they got pointed by them, they did die, but only if you were from their culture, because they believed that would. They just pointed a stick at you, but they had the right mask on, and they were basically assassins, and they pointed the stick, and that their belief that their culture was real, that they've been pointed by their god to die, was enough to kill them, and they died.
So your belief infrastructure within inside of your own self is a indicator of what results are going to happen, and so that's not predictable by any outside lab, that kind of stuff. That's not going to work in there. So it just goes to show you can't use that for all things, particularly belief systems.
That's why I was trying to say. That's why I was trying to say the difference is then what is, like, we often talk about the beliefs of the Egyptians and all this other stuff. What does that tell us about their world in reality, and what they're like? What can they do with their math? Like, not just their math, but with the properties of matter, like the physical of reality. Like, I make an electrical motor the same way, but I can also make it different ways, and we've developed that over time. We got better and better motors. Different types of different types of magnets made things smaller, better, faster. Get the idea. But that's because we can refine certain aspects of reality better, and it requires no human input besides the creation of it. Oddly, that's almost like magic when you think about it. But what I am saying is that the reality is that if we want to really know the truth of things, like, we should be able to calculate it to 9 decimal places type of thing. And that's really hard to do when you think about calculating fire. Like, how do you even do that? You get my meaning? It's that bridge between consciousness and the physical forces that is somehow there, and I don't understand it exactly.
Well, the consciousness itself is a wave. And since it is a wave and everything else is a wave, then you can influence it by your intention. Your beliefs can actually change the characteristic of other forms.
So we have to be able to measure that, you see.
There's a big difference between an influence and a causal agent, and I think that you conflate them. I really do. I don't think you can do that. You can say something influences something, and you can be right. I can tell you that you're going to die tomorrow, and if you believe me, you may have the power to end your life, but that doesn't mean that you can change water to wine. You see what I'm saying? There's a difference. Causal agents, influencers, these are all sort of things that affect things, but an influence is not a causal agent.
I'm saying that consciousness is really the only thing that exists, and that physics is a wave, and that if your intention by your own consciousness can alter and change permanently characteristics of metals and everything else. That's just the way it works. Whether you call it causal, whether you call it causal or what limitations you put on it, that's just the way that works.
But I don't know if
I'm not willing to go that far.
I don't think I'd be willing to do that either. I think Sheldrake shows in some of his stuff that there is obviously a connection, especially when trying to make new materials, or for example, beings being aware of somehow across the ocean that certain things are poisonous. I like those kind of studies that show some of this type of bringing something new into existence, and that might be more difficult because the concept hasn't been there. That's an interesting link, but I think I'm with Duff that I don't know if that's true. I'm willing to sit on that and to accept that I will keep on looking for threads where that reality can be, where I can sort of reach in and go, okay, I see that this is a link. Is there something there that is, like, how did that happen? Like I must know, but it's not just accepting that consciousness could influence it. Although when it comes to the human body, your thoughts obviously have a great effect on it. So that I can't deny. In any way.
I think everybody's trying to say it goes from one extreme change to another, and it's usually not that. It's like there's one guy who figures out how to stuff the basketball, and there's nobody has ever done that before. But as soon as he does it, all of a sudden that it's kind of like he makes the rut or something, and everybody else starts following. And all of a sudden, almost everybody can stuff the basketball. But that change doesn't occur until that one guy does it, and it's usually technological. The changes are slow, but it's persistent, and that's how I see it functioning. So
that's evidence of influence.
I'll give you that. It definitely influenced, but
yeah.
But anyway,
absolutely.
Let me. There's been some good arguments here where people are going, "Where are the timelines of catastrophes?" And I got a question. Can we have that wonderful beginning of that conversation where you guys were arguing and having these timeline debates? Because that's what I made this whole thing. You guys were going off and I was typing what you were talking about. I said, oh, we're going to be talking about timelines of disasters now. Now, as soon as I started the show, because I started early, and then Sean was like arguing, and then suddenly it's like, all right, I'm done. I was like, what?
Yeah, now
Now what are you doing?
I mean, that's what Sean always does. That's his MO. He's the truth. He comes in, he tells the truth, and he fucking leaves. That's how it works.
Dun, 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 the instigator.
He's an enigma wrapped in a robe and a riddle.
I think he's actually having trouble because he's having some communications issues, I think. It's just your signal, Sean. I think it's weak.
Or his mouth is full of food.
As I get closer to cash register, I'm better, but it'll probably be when I get back in my truck. So I can really kind of talk about that.
That's awesome. Okay, well, as soon as you get back in the truck, I want you and Tess to start screaming at each other again because that was great.
I wasn't screaming at her.
That's a joke.
Talking,
that's a joke. It's okay.
Because we all have very different places we are, and we have different research we've done, and we could go back and forth about it for months, but we have to kind of put all of it into a package where we can look at it realistically, if you will, and fit things together, especially the catastrophes and then the natural geological formations that still have me baffled to this day, because no human evidence around any major, or evidence of humans around any major geological formations. It just really isn't. And I'm like, okay, but we can start there. Was it older than the human occupation age? Was it during the human occupation age, et cetera? Things like that.
No, you got a good point. That would be good to talk about, because obviously there's evidence that certain things have been completely wiped off the map, and in a literal sense. I mean, we saw some star forts that were only half there. They were like just gone. The cliff just took them away.
Yeah, I think we're not going to get very far with the logistics and development and all that kind of stuff, because the chronology is civilizations, they develop differently, and they're not going to be coherent or whatever with all the other ones. I think the only way that we're going to get a significant headway with this is start finding ways to look at the disasters that have occurred on the earth and find way to date that stuff, so that we can say this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, and then we can have a framework upon which we can start deliberating what kind of developments have happened in the past and during and afterwards. So that's just my own opinion.
It's probably a fair one, because but we can still do as Michael would say, and start putting things into an order. And certain things clearly, as Sean would say, come before others. If a disaster has destroyed a city, obviously the city was there first, type of thing. I believe you were talking about Mount Vesuvius, if I'm not mistaken, earlier. about how many times that blew up? Because I even heard it. Well, I heard that even
I
blew
did
up
mention
recently.
that.
He was, yes.
Both of you actually were talking about it, so.
Yes.
But I heard it blew up several times. Like, I mean,
I had something really quickly to say about that, and then Sean can go ahead and say what he.
Well, he has to get back to his truck, so go as long as you want.
Okay. Well, now I have done the series. I have done the series about the last 1,000 years of comet disasters. Is my volume okay, by the way?
It's fine.
Because I didn't check it before. I didn't ask before. Okay, great.
5x5.
Excellent. And these records are not very old, right? We're only talking about the last 1,000 years, so it's not like we're trying to figure out from 40,000 years ago. So it's better, it's easier. And I have found so many destructions, and from cometographers and from different websites, not just from one place, or different sources, many different sources that tell of each disaster, and when they saw the comets or the meteors or different usually it was about meteors. That's what comets. I was trying to link the catastrophes to historic episodes where there was, for example, plagues and earthquakes, or the burning down, like the Great Chicago Fire, the San Francisco Fire. Well, I'm going to go into that in the next series. But so I was trying to find the catastrophes, that natural catastrophes, the comets that have been seen, the comets that had been recorded by scientists now, not since then, but both, like in the old times or during the historic, the era that they're talking about the catastrophe, and the scientists now having the records. And so I was doing those three, putting them together. And so I think it's pretty trustworthy. Don't you think? It has three ways to correlate. And I was finding
three
out
correlations
so
is pretty good.
Much destruction. Yes. An incredible amount of destruction where the towns are completely gone. The buildings, like all of Yorkshire, for example, in the 1066 time, got completely destroyed. It was a big track, but it wasn't only there. I also found out that in Spain, the same thing happened. The Alhambra, I was looking into this massacre that occurred in the palace in Granada, which is the Alhambra. It's this beautiful, gorgeous palace built by the Moors, and in Spain. And I was reading how they actually had to rebuild the palace right after that comet, the 1066 comet, which was really, really big. And it's like 1107 was also, it might have been Venus as well.
A comet took care of a castle.
Of Venus. The whole place got totally destroyed in England. Well, the records that I was looking at, in England.
What year was this?
And in Spain.
The reason I ask is because there was an abbey that we went to that was supposed to be King Arthur's Abbey, and it was apparently destroyed by fire, but they don't know by what. And it was about 1,000. It was about 1,000 AD or something. It was in that area.
Yep. That's that time. Terrible destruction.
Tess, one of the things that I don't hear you saying, and I wonder what you think about it. When we read these historical accounts, and which is what you're doing. That's your work right now. When you read through these accounts, I'm wondering, are you considering the reality that these people believed that these electrical events were punishment from God, and therefore would not be particularly interested in going around telling everybody about their latest lightning bolt strike? I think it's important that we understand the context and perspective that these people were experiencing. There were people who were documenting history, I think, that did understand that this was a natural phenomenon. But the culture itself, and for the most part, the religious structure and the political structure were very afraid of being judged by God. They were very superstitious. And so when they had an electrical event, the thing was this wasn't like, oh, this is interesting, I wonder what this is. This was like, this was God, he's punishing us. We have to do something about it. And so if you're a culture who just been hit by a lightning bolt, and your 2,300 people in your tribe are, suffering as a result of this devastating attack, you don't necessarily put that in your books and then go tell your warring faction tribes on the other side of the river that you were just hit by an attack, because that would then mean that they are just and great warriors, that they didn't get attacked and you did. So there's an element of shame and self-blaming that comes in when we have a natural disaster.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, Michael Armstrong talks about that. That there's this
they were evil sort of, people. Like, they got hit by lightning.
Yeah, PTSD. So we have to be very careful when we understand the context within which these historical events are written down. Oftentimes,
also, when they say thunderstorms, it's much more
likely that your enemy is going to say that you were hit by a lightning bolt than you are. You see,
exactly. That's a great point, because see, this is what's going on in the history books. They don't mention ever that there was a comet. Ever. When there's wars and famine, destruction, earthquakes, because they blame it all on their enemies or on God causing the disasters. Always. The church, and then the enemies of the king or the rulers at the time. That's always what they do. They never, ever, ever mention ever the list, like ever. There was a comet, by the way. There was a comet and meteors, and people saw these, and there was fire coming down. Never, ever say that. They always say the armies came in, and they burned down the cities, and they killed all the people, or the armies came in, and they massacred the whole country, and the country was depopulated, and then they took over. That's what they said about the Anglo-Saxons, and that's a lie. And that's what they said about the Normans, which is a lie, because
it is human nature, and it has to be factored in.
Exactly.
Anytime you're doing a timeline, you have to do that. Listen, I'm a gay man, and I don't know how many times I've heard religious people tell me that AIDS is punishment for being gay.
Oh, that's
this is what we
terrible.
But this is what we do. You see, when we have something we don't understand, we blame it on the other. Yes. We have to factor that into our history. This is a huge part of how our history was documented.
We have to.
Every time there was a catastrophe or a comet, the church would come out and put these paintings, which I also have shown in the videos. For example, hell, and they would show the kings, queens, and the people that were disobedient and the sinners, and they were showing this monster, which was the serpent, which was the comet, because people saw it as a serpent in the sky.
Right.
So, and then all the sinners inside being tortured, horribly, horribly tortured. And I think, we even saw that picture, remember, of this like serpent's mouth and the angel with the key. They made that after one of the passings of the comets. So they used it as propaganda. So of course they wouldn't tell people ever that it was a natural phenomenon. We have to figure that out. And that's what I've been doing. I've been correlating all of these together with the passing of comets and catastrophes also from meteors, which are usually in their tails. And sometimes the tails of comets pass, but the comet hasn't been seen. Or they come after. The tails are so long, and they come afterwards, and they bring all these hydrocarbons that we were talking about. So sometimes it's not even directly seen with a comet. Sometimes it's a little bit later or until before or afterwards, but usually it's with the comets. And there were many comets. And somebody was asking, how come we don't see these recently? And I think it's because we've been very, very lucky. And allegedly, Hale-Bopp could have messed with us. And Nassim Haramein talks about this, another astrophysicist. They were calculating that Hale-Bopp, the orbit since, the time of the 80s, when that man, Harrington, I think, somebody had calculated that the orbit of Hale-Bopp, which had a companion, was supposed to come towards Earth. And they were saying that was Nibiru, but I don't know, not at all. I mean, I don't think so. But I remember, they were saying that. And we were lucky. We were really, really lucky. And there has been many catastrophes caused in the 1900s and the 20th century, including pandemics caused by the tails of the comets that passed. And I'm going to go into that in the next videos, because it's really interesting. And the Tunguska event, the same thing. There was a comet right there. I don't know if you know that.
But Comet Belial, or half of it.
We have been very, very lucky. Yeah, it could have been the tail of the comet, but it was related to a comet. we have been just really, really blessed, and we should just be very grateful and just appreciate our time, and instead of hating each other and being mad, because seriously, people have suffered so much constantly with comets. It's just unbelievable. It's hard to believe. So that's why I
think that and thunderstorms are both very deadly.
I don't completely buy that the Dark Ages didn't exist, because I've been looking at these all different correlations with, like I said, from different places, not in one single source, and they correlate to the dates of the catastrophes and the comets and the people dying and the Dark Ages and people just being obliterated, just dead. They're just died, and it makes sense. And of course, you'll never hear it in a history book. This comet came by and it burned down the cities and it destroyed the place and the people died because of the tail of the comet, because it's all electricity and it's electric or plasma physics to start with. And then the church,
Great Daylight Comet.
The church also would look really bad. All religions would look really, really bad, because people would say, hey, wait a minute. Do you mean that we're not getting punished? Because until now there's people waiting to be punished in the United States. The right people, or what do you call it, Republicans or whatever.
I think it's more fundamentalist Christian, but yes, don't worry about that. Yeah,
they say we deserve,
that's because we know we've been bad and we deserve
punishment.
You do, you do. Anyway, go on.
It's scary. So just what you were saying, it's like they're almost bringing it onto themselves. But yes, we've been very blessed and lucky that we have not had to experience that. But they were experiencing it. In 1918, what was that, the Spanish flu?
Spanish flu,
That was a comet. That was a comet.
Well,
in 1908, there was another one. Some examples. Yeah, and
I'm just looking at one right now. They thought this was a daylight one.
Yes, I was wondering about why would they, like the man that Sean was talking about. I think I read his book, and he was talking about Velikovsky, this guy. I think he's Norwegian. No, he's German. He's German. He was talking about all this time, just thousands of years being just erased from history. And I was thinking, why would be? No. This is somebody else that Sean has been talking about.
There's a couple of them. There's a couple.
And
to piggyback on what she's saying is, what happens is mainstream academians try to lump Gunnar Heisen into the category of, like a Fomenko, into conspiracy theorists, so people won't look at it. Well, that act is over now. It's like, no. You're gonna, listen to what the man has to say.
Conspiracy theories are cool.
Yeah, just put them all in the conspiracy category, and nobody will pay attention. Because I guess what jumped out at me from Heisen's work was, and I'm paraphrasing, Rome started becoming unstable with their government, and barbarians came, and the city burned, and they destroyed the aqueducts. Now I remember that from high school, and it's like, well, wait a minute, the aqueducts are there. They dug them up. They're pretty far down under the ground, but they're there. Everything is there. So they telling the story, just like she said, of an assault of an army that was a natural phenomenon, because they're not thinking and writing the way we do today. I mean, they're putting it in a different, like, very stylized interpretation. Very stylized, very stylized interpretations of things that we would today say, okay, there was a flood. I survived the 77 flood in John.
The Valkyries.
The 1936 flood happened, and you had the Great Flood of 1889. If something were to happen, my son wasn't there. He wasn't born until 99. Everybody gets wiped out as of a certain age. Now, him and his buddies are a certain age. They weren't there, so they're going to have to be like, okay, we don't have no records. Well, we know there was a flood. Okay, now how do we retell it? So they're relying on what we told them about the flood, but they have no real evidence about it, so they kind of get some things wrong. Is really the angle that Heisen's coming from. Is like people are rebuilding after catastrophes and miss some things, put some things together incorrectly, and it becomes a jumbled up mess. It's pretty much what he's saying, and it starts repeating itself. The history of Rome repeats itself, and then, okay, well, the archaeological evidence conflicts with the whole thing. Like, well, what do we do now? Why are the Vikings and Roman cultures exactly the same? Why are they exactly the same? Like with art, the boat. Only thing was different on the boats, I think, were the sails. I'm like, okay, everything's the same. glass blown, glass blown vases and things, and well, the older broken pottery and dishes and things are older than the newer ones. Well, no, that doesn't. I mean, older than the ones that are intact. Well, that doesn't mean anything. You know, the argument starts going deeper and deeper, and the historians will go right back to the historical record. And Heisen's like, let's go with the archaeological record. Well, no, we don't want to do that. Let's just go with the historical record. It's like it starts a mess. I mean, the guy Trevor Palmer, because I'll post it when I get home. He's the historian that wrote an article about, you know, some of Heisen's claims, and he gave a very detailed, comprehensive history of Rome, basically, in Europe. I mean, it was long as hell, and I'm like, it took me a long time to read it, and I'm like, Heisen's articles were short. Let's go to the archaeology. The history repeats itself. It's the same history from 200, 500 and some change, and 700 and some change. It's the exact same story with different names. Exactly the same. Problem number one. Problem number two, depth. Problem number three, and then he just keeps going on and on and on down the list, and it's like, shit, there's a problem. I mean, there's a huge problem. There's a huge problem there, and it's like, okay, do we A, put the historical record off to the side and just deal with the archaeology and let that determine it, or then look at the history, but don't push the history into the archaeology to influence the way you're interpreting everything. I mean, that's where the argument really gets super deep, because he's saying no history on the table at all. Just look at it, and that's it. Let that determine everything. I'm like, whoa, because obviously they didn't excavate it at the time. When was Rome excavated? You guys still hear me?
Oh, yes, I can. I know. Yes. I exactly know when Rome. Well, I know when the first. There's paintings that show you when it was buried. Like there's a painting from like the 800s, and people went there, and it seemed to be fine. And then like at before 1000 though, it was under 40 feet of dirt. So.
Well, there's so many. Yeah, the volcanoes were going off. I have all that written down. Every volcanic explosion. Well, especially of Europe and England, because I'm using sources in English. And yes, you can read the sources, and they're amazing, and the explanations of each volcanic eruption. And of course, with volcanoes, there was also tempest. When the comets were coming by, there were surges of the ocean. Pieces of Italy just disappearing, like Atlantis. They were just disappearing in the 1000, 1500, 1600, 1700. Just ongoing volcanoes. So people don't think about that. It's not like it just happened once or twice. So cities get completely destroyed, and they have to rebuild most of them. And then every time you see the rocks, you can see the stones in the buildings. There's like 4 different types of rocks and stones. That means that how many times they have rebuilt. And you're not even seeing what's underneath. Like they haven't buried. Like you said, they just build on top, because can you imagine the work of the people that survived? They're just sick. They're traumatized, and then they would have to go and dig out. Of course not. They just build on top what they can put. Like they get the pieces of stone, and little by little they rebuild. But
they find a solid foundation, or they dig down to a solid foundation and they build on top of it.
And yes, people were so hurt with all the pestilence and plagues, and besides the storms and the earthquakes and the volcanoes and the cooling. It's just unbelievable how people had to build up, rebuild.
Well, so yeah, that's and of course they would go. It makes perfect sense they'd go to the same spot, because they built there for a reason. You know, this is at the corner of 3 rivers. This is the same. It's strategically, it's still a good spot for a city, even though it's been completely buried. And so you built right on top of. Like, I mean, it's found all the time, especially in Europe, where we find, I mean, even Brunelleschi's, what was it called? His dome that he made there for, I'm not sure what the name of that city is, Florence, and the cathedral there, and how he built it without any supports and so forth. Well, the reason that becomes very entertaining to me is to imagine that underneath that, so that building still survives. So even though it had no roof and it was finished like 300 years after it was started, they eventually got the darn thing done. But the actual test dome that he built was completely buried under a car park. You know, like it was just, they just found it. And they were like, what the hell is this? Who would make a little tiny building like this? And goes, no, this is a test room for what the cathedral. And they realized what they had there. And of course, obviously, it's incredibly important. But they didn't even know it was, like, how did that get buried? That thing was 20 feet tall. And it was a test dome. And it's completely buried. But not the cathedral itself. Like, did they clean around the cathedral because it was more important? You know what I mean? Like, I would clean off the cathedral because it's the center of the city. It's the most important thing. But all these other buildings, they're gone. We'll just build on top of them, knock down the walls right here, and just start leveling it flat, you know?
Well, it's possible that those were considered to be energetically or spiritually significant.
Well, that's what I meant, yeah.
In a way that other buildings might not have been. You know, the first time I ever heard of a disaster conspiracy theory or whatever was Hal Lindsey in The Late Great Planet Earth back in the, late 80s? Mm-hmm. He was a Christian, and he was a catastrophist. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of anything related to catastrophism. Isn't that synonymous? It's just ironic that I'm like,
because that's what God does. He just goes, screw you, screw you, screw you. That's all he does, right?
Well, this was what I understood. I mean, this was that's what I understood was happening. And I read Revelations, and I had no idea what the hell was going on with Revelations. And so this was the beginning for me. What I kind of figured out from my early teens in starting to understand catastrophism in general was that there was a lot of people who were really pushing information, and there were a lot of people who were really withholding information. And that was a really interesting idea to me, that there was both propaganda and secrecy occurring around the same issues. That became a template for me later. And in the biggest picture, Neil, I think what I got from sort of my fascination with disaster and catastrophe was the idea that, this bad thing is coming in the future, which is a timeline. And then the idea that, bad things happen over and over again, which is cyclical.
Right.
So for me, for many years, I thought, are we living on a timeline, or are we living in cycles, like in the grand scale of history, and catastrophe within the context of history?
That's still very interesting.
And so here's what the revelation, Sean's talking about revelations early in our show. My revelation is this: we are not living in a cycle, and we are not living on a timeline. We're living in a spiral. And from perspectives, that spiral looks like a circle. And from some perspectives, that spiral looks like a line, but it's neither. What we see, and this happens, and Heather Stargazer mentioned this recently, what we see is repeated things slightly different. And that's what a spiral gives you. So catastrophes, disasters happen along a repeated timeline in a semi-cyclical manner, as indicated by the behavior of a spiral. And so we will see catastrophes in the future, and they will be slightly different than the catastrophes we've had in the past. And both things are true. And so on the grandest scale of sort of like basic geometry, the idea of circles or lines, that all went out the window. And so now when I think about new ideas, when I think about new theories in science and physics, I always think in terms of how do those concepts exist and function within the context of a spiral. And that to me is the gold nugget that I found at the core of catastrophism, was that everything happens in a spiral manner, not the same over and over again, not one thing and never again, but similar things repeating throughout time in slightly different contexts with slightly different elements. And that fits perfectly with the electric view, because that's where I got it, right? So mm-hmm. I think that, it doesn't matter where you come from or where you're going, as long as you got the basic tools. Electric universe theory gives us the basic tools that we can apply to disaster, that we can apply to catastrophe, that we can apply to timelines, and come up with something more of an accurate assessment, even though history is deceptive and incomplete.
Yeah, I also wanted to can I say just a little example of the Dark Ages?
Yes.
And then I agree with Michael. Definitely, we're on a spiral, so that makes sense. And we encounter different things, different currents. Comets keep getting captured by the sun. They become moons of Neptune. I mean, do you see how many moons are being discovered? They're new moons of Neptune, Jupiter, Saturn, because they come in and they usually stay there. Sometimes they come in towards the sun.
We caught one, right? We got one beside us right now, a moon of Saturn.
Saturn is now the king.
Well, it's our moon now, but we took it with us, I think, or something. I don't know where.
So let me just read to you what happened in 525, because Sean thinks that it didn't exist. So I just wanted to, now he's thinking that maybe that was all made up, but I just wanted to say this. It's just a very little paragraph. In the 7th year, or Emperor Justin, which is Justinian, that's how they were counting. AD 525 appeared a comet. And the same year, Antioch was again overwhelmed in ruin by an earthquake, again, because it just had been overwhelmed before by other comets. Some authors relate that 300,000 persons perished in this catastrophe, 300,000. And among them, Euphrasius, the bishop. The event happened on the 29th of May, about 12 o'clock. A conflagration, fires, that's the comet tails bringing, that's what they call a conflagration. Not just a little fire, but it's just a massive, just burns huge tracts of land and areas. Followed and consumed what was left of the city. In the same shocks, Dyrrachium, it's another city, now Durazzo. The Epidaurus of high antiquity is the name of a city. Corinth and other cities were greatly injured. That's from Cometographia, that talks about comets, the history of comets. In the year 526, a comet was also seen. Earthquakes in Turkey killed 250,000. That's from Noah Webster's book. 250,000. In this short period, there were constant catastrophes and pandemics, plagues. But one pandemic that started in 543 AD lasted for over 52 years. People dying constantly, it just wouldn't go away until 596 AD. So 52 years more. Decimating the world's population, destroyed whole cities, castles, churches, beautiful cathedrals due to fires. It caused migrations of whole territories, such as the ones from Scandinavia to England. That's at the time when people can trace they find a lot of DNA from Scandinavia, but there's a lot of women in there. So it doesn't match the warriors that came and invaded. They were just survivors. They were trying to find another place, and that's what they have done. It wasn't the Vikings coming and to kill everyone. They were just poor survivors trying to find another place, and that's when that occurred. So I just wanted to mention that, and there's more. It's just a little example.
That must suck, eh? I mean, I'm glad that they recorded
just that little period of time.
But you're going from place to place, right? Like you're refugees basically, and then suddenly, screw you again. Like, that's just mean.
Well, and everywhere was destroyed. It was really hard. It wasn't like it was perfect over here, and they left the worst of it and got to a better place everywhere. That's the time that allegedly King Arthur went to America, and Ramon talks all about that. And I made a little thing in this King Arthur and the Dark Ages. There's a book that talks about how he, during this time, because all of Europe was destroyed, he or his brother was somewhere on the ship, and he got 10 years. He was somewhere so different where he was supposed to be for 10 years. He couldn't come back. Then he came back, and then they left. And they left, obviously, because everything was destroyed and ruined. So they probably were trying to find a place to survive. And he went with, I don't know how many people, to America, and allegedly he got killed there. And then they brought his body back to England. And it's quite an interesting story. But, there's this guy who talks about that. But Ramon knows a lot about that, too. And it's the same timing of that Arthur. Now, there's supposed to be several Arthurs. And the whole thing with Arthur it's really fascinating because the Merlinus, or Merlin, the magician, was really a prophet. They call him the prophet. He was an astronomer, and he knew that the comets were coming, and that's why he predicted the birth of Pandragons. The Pandragons, Arthur and his father, that's what they were called, the Pandragons. The dragons were the comets in the sky that looked like dragons. And that's why that whole thing is about. And that's why also history just wants to get rid of that, because it's full of catastrophes, comets, and dragons and prophets.
It's kind
so
of
with your accent. It's actually Pendragons.
Pendragons, the great dragons. So that's thank you. So that's that story that fits right into this timeline, and they're trying to make it all into fantasy in history books. It's just all made up, fictitious.
Incredibly
but
interesting.
It relates to that. It relates to that. And there was a historic king called Arthur, and many other kings have been named Arthur because of him, recent kings. So it's really fascinating. I don't know the whole story as good as Ramon. I hope that I think he's going to do some video with Greg J about it. He's going to go really
he's
deep.
Fantastic. Him and his ideas though are not mine. But I don't argue with him though, because I find that he's the story, I could be wrong. I mean, but obviously seeing the archetypes there might not be correct. There might be, I mean, hell, I went to England and stood on King Arthur's grave, technically. So how am I supposed to argue with that? I don't understand, The idea that Merlin aged backwards in time is interesting. If he was just the top hat, the world mountain, was he shrinking? There's ideas there that might be encoded into the words. So all the studies bring new information on that light, even if you don't necessarily agree. It's just my thoughts, but
yes. Yeah, that's cool. I'm trying to find the name. I'm trying to find the name of the. Oh, that's okay. Geoffrey. Oh, wait. I'm trying to find the name of the author, so if people want to read into that. But Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote about Merlin. It's called Merlinian Prophecy, Prophetia Merlini, which is really cool because it talks about just the comets. Merlin talking about the comets, which is awesome. And one interesting thing about Merlin's life is that they said that he went crazy and he went into the woods and he started talking to the animals and he made all these crazy stories. Well, what he was doing, he was trying to survive the plagues. So he got away that's what people would do. They just became hermits and they would go into the woods and get away from people because everyone was dying. And that's what happened. He became a hermit because he was trying to survive. And he describes the winters and the snow and everything being just outrageous and horrible and crazy. And he was talking to animals because he didn't want to be around people. But it's very cool. Yeah.
My friend Captain 0264 has been trying to get me to read Uriel's Machine. He says it explains an ancient society that helped the world understand comets and when they will hit.
Oh,
I'm gonna talk to him a little bit more about that later on after the show while we're doing World of Tanks. But yeah,
I like this. It's so nice to see the modern interpretations of fear with regards to comets and more recent times. And the understanding that when they said thunderstorm, they might not have meant what we mean. When we hear, oh, it's a thunderstorm, and the dog gets scared and you kind of laugh, but maybe there's a reason why the dog was scared, because they used to kill them all the time, these loud bangs. And it was very scary, and for good reasons. They could actually hurt you.
That's why they run away from these loud bangs today, because it's ingrained in their genetic memory.
Well, that's
it's
just
also
an idea.
Scary, right?
It's also scary, yeah.
Very scary. It scares me. But animals can sense earthquakes. You know that, right? I think they sense electromagnetic changes. They can feel them. So they've used them in Turkey and Middle East they have them in cages. I think earthquakes.
I think the subsonic sounds is what they pick up on.
Yeah,
the sounds before we do.
That we don't. Yeah, that we can't hear.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's fully understood. they're also able to detect things like epilepsy and cancer and all kinds of weird stuff. And so there's something going on there. It's one of these, we see the correlation, but not the causation.
Consciousness. They're connected to the conscious flow of everything better than we are, like we used to be. That
may be that they have extended consciousness. It may be the truth, but the other part of it is that they have extended hearing and they have differences in how they see things.
Oh yeah,
their sense organs are slightly different. And
they live on visual cues.
Well,
a lot of species can see magnetic fields.
I'm struggling with the idea that we want to spiritualize or make everything sort of mystical. I don't dismiss the mystical, but I think it's important that we understand that dogs hear things that we don't hear. It doesn't mean that they're wise sages,
Right,
right? Am I wrong here?
No, we're not talking about them being sages. We're talking about them being able to do things like understand when their master's coming home, even if that master goes and does some shopping or goes and have some food after work, not at the regular time. They'll know that that their master's coming home as soon as the master thinks about it.
I wouldn't disagree with that, and you're absolutely right. But I would say this, that the explanations for those anecdotal experiences are likely explainable in practical terms and not necessarily. I mean, I consider myself someone who has a very high empathy, and so I'm sensitive to things that other people are not. I often spend a lot of time alone because energy of people bugs me. And I think that in that way, I'm like dogs. Dogs are highly emotional and social beings, and
maybe
so they're
you
sensitive.
Read body language better.
Yeah, right, exactly. But to me, it's not about I have psychic abilities. To me, it's I read body language better, and maybe I have psychic abilities, or maybe dogs do too. But the likelihood is that they just read body language better. And I'm okay with that explanation being the majority of the explanation. So I'm saying
a lot of our. I'm going to ask you if you're Rh negative, because a lot of Rh negative people tend to seem to be a lot more sensitive to these things than our Rh positive people.
I'm not, and it's a good question. I just found out my blood type. It's like one of the most common ones, actually. So I wish I could support you and tell you that I'm special, but I'm actually not.
So back to what you were saying, not only can some species see magnetic fields, like fish and birds have recently been shown to actually see magnetic fields, and we're not talking about like a pit viper where they can sense infrared spectrum using their pits. It's nothing like that at all. Right. It's actually tied to their visual cortex, their occipital lobe, as opposed to some sort of an olfactory center of their brain. So
they have magnetic sensing.
Able to actually physically see magnetic fields. So there's a lot of weird stuff in science that's going on, and just because you don't currently have the science to explain it doesn't mean there isn't science to explain it.
And there are some humans that are said to see slightly differently, and Tesla was one of them.
Yeah, I think it's highly likely that we had more of a magnetic sense in the past as well.
In other words, when you see the color red, there's no indication that when you see the color red, that the color red looks red to you. When you look at a box of crayons, the color that you see as green could look red to me, and you would never know because it's your brain's interpretation of a bunch of wavelengths.
Right.
People's vision could be skewed one way or the other toward the ultraviolet or toward the infrared, perhaps. But the magnetic
so that's an interesting
because that's
an interesting distinction you make there. I think that's really important. Because
and then you have to.
It's not one or the other. It's both. It's perception and reality. The fact that we perceive red differently does not mean that red doesn't exist.
And it goes into the genetics too.
Yep. Sounds could sound completely different to everybody else, but the relative differences in those sounds is similar enough that we all recognize them as sounds.
Right.
There's
we have a functional understanding.
There's only two. There's only two issues with this. Okay, I like what you're saying, and I thought about this a lot when I was younger. And two of the things popped into my mind. Number one, colors have certain effects on people that seem to be, like, we don't know why. Like, for example, blue is cool, orange makes you hungry, that type of thing. The difference is then also with regards to the other one being the other sense. What was it you were talking about? Not sight, but sounds and notes. Sounds and notes, right? Sounds and notes. Only certain combinations of those make chords which are pleasurable. So that, so.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your perception of how they sound, the physical aesthetics of their sound, like it would be impossible for me if we could switch souls and bodies for a moment. You might discover that, for instance, colors are inverted for me, and what looks dark to me is actually light, etc.
I would say at that point that there's something wrong with the connection, and we're going to have to, you've plugged it in upside down.
Well, yeah, there is a reason why we call.
I know what you're saying, though.
Red, because there's a general consensus that that's red in hue. Now, yeah, we might see slightly different hues of red. But there again, there's a general consensus.
And again, this isn't a timeline.
As well.
Still is good. No, I'm not arguing with that.
I have a thought experiment for you guys. What did Helen Keller think red looked like? Now, before you answer the question, there is an answer to this question. Helen Keller was blind and deaf.
That's true.
She's had it described to her by so many people that she started a concept in her mind of what the color red looked like, even though she
exactly right. From birth. She had a cultural understanding of the significance of the color, and it made sense to her, and she was able to function in society with that understanding, never having personally experienced sight herself. So there is the cultural construct of the color. There is the color, and those things should not be conflated.
Yep, it's weird. If you see the color red, if you happen to see the color red, if you look at a stop sign, and I look at a stop sign, and the color that I'm seeing looks blue to me, but it looks red to you, but it still falls on some part of the electromagnetic spectrum, so that like your cones, the portion of your eye cells that are perceiving that color, determine what that physically looks like. So it's very tough. Like you can't say it would be impossible to see what somebody else's perceptions are like. But the point is, we didn't recently understand that fish and birds are able to see magnetic fields. Now, what the implications of that are for when they look up into space is anybody's guess. I don't think it means that they're able to see them at that sort of a range at an astronomical.
What a great idea.
But
that's brilliant.
Imagine how crazy the cosmos would look if you could see magnetic fields if you looked up there. It would be absolutely confusing to even look at.
Brilliant. I never thought of it.
Yeah, so just, like I said, just because we don't necessarily have science now to explain certain phenomena doesn't mean that there isn't science somewhere available to explain the phenomenon. And so as I see it, the more I study into the universe, the weirder
I think I can explain it.
Gets. And
I think
the less coherent most explanations become. And, of course, you end up getting railroaded. You're like, okay, these are my theories. And then that paradigm gets busted. And then you're like, okay, that means I'm down to these. And then you discover more questions to certain answers that you search for. Anyway, I'll stop. I'll get off.
When they say that certain animals share the same DNA as us, it's all the same. It's just
even viruses share most of the same DNA.
Just different switches are turned on and off. I submit that the birds have a certain switch turned on that allows them to see these fields. We don't have that turned on anymore. Maybe perhaps in the ancient past we had that available to us.
So now we know that the birds are male in the birds and the bees because they get turned on. Thank you.
The only way that we're able to see the way magnetic fields are when we look into astronomy is by looking at movements of plasma with radio telescopes. So
right.
Does that equate to the fact, does that mean that my goldfish and my pleco have miniature radio telescopes associated with their vision? That's freaking crazy. But it does explain how things like sharks and other fish are able to see in the dark because they're using some sort of a radio portion of the spectrum.
Apparently, they also can feel electrical muscles moving. Like, they can feel that in the water, and they sense that along the length of their body.
Yeah,
they have receivers of electrical impulses. Yes.
Yeah, and there are a few different mechanisms for that. One of them is the lateral line in most of your normal fish, like a goldfish, and then you've got weird sensors in the noses of sharks.
Yeah, and the head is most of their sensory organs for those electrical fields.
But all fish that are predator fish have some ability to sense prey because of its motion. So, like, if an injured fish is on the surface, your fish, like a fish, is able to see that, but they're able to also feel because the lateral line is some sort of a vibration sensor sort of a thing. It's totally different than their magnetic vision. Their magnetic vision is way more crazy because, again, it's their visual cortex. It's not nerves that extend all the way to the surface through the scales directly to the spine like the lateral line is. It's going to their brain and to their eyes. It's pretty serious. And
yeah, it's all fed into their visual cortex, and they complete the visual picture with what's missing, what they can't see visually with visual light. They use the electromagnetic pulses that they can detect to say, well, there's a blip over there. I should head over that way because I'm hungry.
So, for instance, this might explain some owl vision too, because I think one of the experiments involved putting noise into an owl environment where they make an owl fly through a really difficult, like, three-dimensional maze. And they noticed that no matter how much it's not just using sound to fly through there. It's probably using vision now that I think about it, but it's not just using sound, because they would put all kinds of sound interference in there, and the owl would still be able to fly through at just about full speed as if it was daylit.
Well, they must be. Well. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know this is what they think that some of the birds can see, is what I'm showing on the screen here. This white directional sense here is kind of what they see, and then on the top, and the bottom is a combined that compared to if they look left and right. So they would see.
Birds have a visual cortex, so that the back part of your brain, like when you fall on the ground, when you see stars, the reason you see stars is because your visual cortex gets punched, basically. And about half of a bird's brain is made out of occipital lobe. So similar to the temporal lobe on an elephant, a bird has a giant occipital lobe. We know they're able to see ultraviolet too. Their vision must be way more exquisite than just what people think, hawks have binocular vision. It must be way more insane than that.
Yeah, I would agree.
And of course, they need
20K vision. Yeah.
It's associated with spatial skills. So to be able to fly around as a personal method of motion, you have to have a crazy amount of brain associated with that just to not kill yourself. But it appears to be a lot more than just their spatial skills.
The homing pigeon, yes.
Makes sense to me.
So I'm just
homing pigeon from the Mach 5.
Lines. And again, this would explain why bird migratory patterns get messed up during magnetic excursions on Earth too, because
that makes a lot of sense.
They're not seeing the correct lines.
Yeah, because the magnetic field lines get changed.
That
probably affects migratory patterns from year to year, and disperses species around the world a little better too.
Well, let me just explain. Didn't someone just prove that dogs poop on a magnetic line, like north to south? I don't know where I just read that.
I read that article.
I don't know.
I don't know if that's real.
It's been a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I didn't know if that's real. I laughed.
My dog seems to poop in all different directions.
Well, it's good to know.
That.
Thank you. Whew, I'm glad you have evidence of this. So.
Well, I mean, I've observed her pooping east, pooping west, pooping north.
We need the polar alignment of the butthole during the poop, and then maybe the spine. I don't know.
Okay, I gotta go out and buy a GPS now. What the hell?
You need two, so you can tell which direction your dog's facing.
Just tape a compass to your ass.
That's easy. I just tape a compass to her back.
Make a grid every place that the dog can poop, and then have a compass rose on the grid, and then you can
make it into a school project. You can just get a camera and then just give it to the bunch of kids to go look at it for 24 hours and tell you how many dog poops are in what direction. So you're fine.
Stop. Has anybody said Stop right now. Has anybody said hello to the peoples in the live chat?
Well, we've actually been referencing them and moving things back and forth, but please feel free, Rick.
Yeah, Neil's been kind of on it.
Amazingly enough, because you guys are just rambling.
Captain Zero, my friend.
Are you still recording?
I am.
Still recording?
Oh, yes. Live, actually.
Yeah, I went in hyperspace.
Can you go back and edit out
lost the signal? Like, come on. Yeah,
we're still here, man. We're still here.
That was crazy. But
we
buried axe.
Screw technology. I don't like technology. I was like, hello?
Buried Axe Spade, hello, Renegade, Esoteric Golds, Heather Stargazer, Pond, Man 27, John Park, John Pershing, Holistic Researcher, Ryan, as always.
Dumbfoot Carpenter wants to know, has anyone heard of David Lapointe?
Electric Origins.
Who knows? What do you guys know about David Lapointe?
Cheryl Scott.
Jesus Magnets.
Mathis R.A. Welcome, everybody. And if I missed anybody, I'm sorry.
Esoteric Gold.
I know a bit about the term of field.
Okay.
Yeah, let's drop a few questions, Duffy. You've been gathering them, haven't you?
I have.
I'm very much aware of him, so.
Okay. Dumbfuck Carpenter. Everybody knows David Lapointe already. So yeah, apparently we have. So Esoteric Gold says the question is: does a crystal degrade as it releases electricity from pressure?
It doesn't.
To the sarcophagus idea.
It doesn't release. It doesn't actually make electricity. It actually just makes a positive and negative point on a surface, much like a magnet can make a positive and negative influence. So you can have an a magnetic moment create a potential slide for these currents to go down, which is basically what happens when you make a plasmoid, that type of thing. However, that's an actual movement of charge. What's going on with this?
Crystals.
What's going on with this is not a movement of charge. What you have is it's a slope that is made, but it's just like a permanent magnet. Unless you do something with it, it's not doing anything. So I'll give you a good example. Sonar. When you have a sonar dish
we're
on
talking about a non-metallic crystal here, right?
Yeah, just crystal. But
a non-metallic crystal.
There's no really such thing as a metallic one. So yes. So what happens is that I think there might be if you get cold enough. But anyway, the situation with sonar is, let's say a pulse of sound comes out. Well, then it hits a bunch of transducers on this dome. Each one of them slightly get compressed by the water and therefore slightly create an electric current and therefore create a picture on a screen for a guy to look at. Now, you can also then reverse that process and send out a pulse using all your transducers and go pulse and then let them hear. So you're just creating a little bit of sound. Now, these are very high pitches. because they're transducers. But if you're running with like a speaker does the same thing, but with a magnet. So, but as you know, a speaker just sitting there does nothing. You have to actually either push the speaker or run electricity through it to move the speaker. So it doesn't happen by itself. So this potential then is just sitting there. But what they've seemed to do is create a slope which creates positive on one side, negative on another, and put that inside an object. That would act somewhat like, and I'm not kidding here, if I'm correct, like a volcano works. It sort of might be why they called it a pyramid, fire in the middle, might be for that, I don't know. But basically, if you have something like that going on,
I like that theory.
Yeah, you're doing a volcano has a plasmoid likely at the middle where we call the magma chamber. But
yeah, I would think so.
In this particular, and of course, it's probably repowered because of the things are going in right along that, like a tree, except incredibly strong. Well, in this situation, here you have a pressurized container, which is now on top of the Earth, like a positive anode tuft on top of the Sapphire project. So it's just sitting there on this ball, and that's your pyramid. Okay, and this is now sitting there as a positive thing on top of this negative thing. So now it's going to change the atmosphere around that area, if you get my meaning. Just like volcanoes change the atmosphere around an area. So I'm not exactly sure of all the principles here, and I could be describing it wrong. I think what they do is they wrap it in an insulative shell and put a metal thing on top to create a positive, negative, positive, which, by the way, if you think about it, is exactly what we do today to electrically insulate your computer here. For example, there's a power supply. The reason you need a power supply is because you don't actually run the motherboard off of the 120 mains. You actually run it off of 12 volts, which is going through a bunch of transformers, and they're magnetically coupled to each other, which is not electrically coupled. They're magnetically coupled. There is a finite amount that can go through that, which means it can't blow up. Now, if you do the same thing with a pyramid, then you would actually have a buffer zone. So now you have a negative thing on top of a positive thing. It's going to want to strike the negative thing up there because it thinks it's ground, but they basically pushed the envelope up. So now it's hitting that thing and not messing with them at all. That's the kind of thing I'm looking at here. Okay. Because that's the kind of situation they developed. They basically made a giant capacitive shell and an anode tuft on top of the Earth, so to speak.
Neil,
so it's
I just wanted
sense to me.
The pyramid is like a man-made volcano, essentially, is what you're saying.
Well, in a similar principle, they might have noticed that volcanoes have this principle and they try to imitate it. I don't know, but that seems likely, something like that.
All right, I just wanted to see if that's what you were saying, because I was trying to come to grips with what you'd said.
It could have had tons of other potential once they realized they could harness the energy of it. Like
like essentially, like the theory here is that a volcano perhaps is like a crystal that's kind of insulated from the rest of the crust around it, and then it has a tendency to charge up and discharge, and the rocks can't decide if they're part of the atmosphere or part of the lithosphere.
Yeah, that's actually kind of true.
Interesting.
It's like a pimple on the Earth.
I think that's what's going on.
Yeah.
Neil, I just wanted to make a little slight correction of a statement you just made about metals not being crystalline in structure.
Well,
they are.
They are, but they have.
They're cube and they're hexagonal. And interesting enough,
they don't resemble.
Emerald shares hexagonal structure with metals as well. So.
Right, but here's the thing: that if it's conductive, you can't get this principle of creating that angle on it. They must be kind of non-conductor to do that. Well, semi-conductive.
Exactly,
really.
Exactly. That's why I was making the point about non-metallic crystals.
They're probably just packed too tightly together, as opposed to stone, which has probably more space in between them. Because
there's like too much electron availability in metals.
Thank you. I was not going to have this debate. Okay, I was like, okay, let the electrical engineer explain. You're really freaking me out right now, because there's a part of me that just started like going, oh no, you can't don't explain that. Don't explain that.
Yeah, we say the sun's
Be electric. I have a
matter.
question for you, Neil.
Yes. What's the question?
If crystals are living, do they also hold memory?
On Stargate.
Okay.
They hold demonic souls. Almost in all cases, they hold demonic souls. No.
No, that's no. The black ones hold human souls. Remember, we're talking Skyrim, right? Or where are we at?
Right. No. Depends on whose soul is in the amulet.
In which paradigm, right? That's the question.
Exactly.
No, it should be in which game or what movie?
Here. Daniel asks, should I bring up time dilation, special relativity? We can probably disprove it basically right now using Parker Solar Probe clock data. Did we cover that?
No, we didn't. But since we have a moment here, why not? Give it a shot.
Good God. All right, I haven't brought this up with anybody for a long time, but
I'm going to get the Parker Probe images out and you can go nuts.
Okay, well, starting in the mid-90s, I started to look at the implications of what special relativity mean. And special relativity essentially means that if you travel 0.99999% the speed of light, your clock runs very, very slow compared to my clock while you're going that fast, right?
Here's some images there.
So the implications of this on the rest of nature are that it probably means that kinetic energy has to do with how fast time elapses. And let's just not say anything about what the term time means and just assume everybody knows what the word time means.
We'll go with that. Okay.
So we don't have to be in a super long explanation of how what this theory is. So in any case, if you can travel nearly the speed of light, if you go the speed of light, your clock stops, let's say, according to special relativity. So if that's the case, what happens if you stop? If, according to Einstein's math, if you stop and your kinetic energy is down to nothing, your time must elapse infinitely fast, the exact opposite, which means the implications of being on a planet moving in a galaxy away from the, quote, Big Bang, end quote, point in the universe means that
I thought time flew when you're having fun.
If you stop and
anyway, keep going.
You won't be having fun if you do this.
Okay.
Because the implications of that are that if you stop in relation to the point where the galaxy is not moving anymore, because kinetic energy determines your time according to special relativity, if you can slow your time down infinitely by traveling the speed of light, you should be able to speed it up infinitely by stopping. And according to the way everybody thinks redshift has galaxies behaving, there's some sort of point that all the galaxies appear to be moving away from. And if that's the case, and I'm not saying it is, but if that's the case, you should be able to fly a probe on some sort of a vector consistent with that line and watch the time speed up ridiculously fast. And then as soon as you turn the probe off that vector, the clock should return to normal functioning.
Correct. Technically.
Which means the Parker Solar Probe would need to figure this in as it travels 244,000 miles per hour around the sun. And I'm not exactly sure if this is being proven or disproven right now, but let's just say I wouldn't be surprised to find no extreme anomalies in the data indicating time dilation is a thing when it's because okay, so picture the local group of galaxies. They're all allegedly moving due to redshift measurements away from some certain point, which means if you go toward that certain point at a very high velocity, your clock should speed up because you should be traveling at a very slow speed, kinetic energy, special relativity speaking.
I get you.
And in other words,
it's like this right here, basically on the screen. You can see that the Earth.
That's got to do.
No.
The implications of that on cosmology are that has to figure into all the motions of every single astronomical measurement ever. So I think it's kind of important to prove that it's not a thing. I'm not sure if the Parker Solar Probe is capable of doing it. And perhaps there's even code in there to figure this in, but I'm not thinking that it is. Because it would mess with the clocks of every spacecraft constantly.
And how would you actually do it? Like, how would you correct it? They've noticed, by the way, this is actually called something. It's called the flyby anomaly. It's
really?
Yeah, it's referred to. If you look it up on Wikipedia, here I'll do it right here.
I was trying to
Flyby
get
anomaly.
this theory for 20
Oh, they're
years,
all called anomaly because every screw up is all one of these. But anyway, if you look, you can see it has the data right here. Galileo 2, all the probes, and how much they are off by. And here's a chart graphing their offness. And basically, when they fly around certain planets, the laws of reality seem to change, and they don't know why.
Yeah, and there are different theories about it.
The mass changes. Did they hit some? Yeah. Was it a gravitational wave? Was it? Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have to take into account whether you're using some sort of chemically based clock or an atomic clock, and all sorts of other aspects of the environment. Because once you get down into the nitty gritty of science, man, what it always comes down is to what are you actually measuring?
Look at this one. Look at this one. In 2018, a careful analysis of the trajectory of the presumed interstellar asteroid Oumuamua revealed a small excess velocity as it receded from the sun. Initial speculation suggested the anomaly was due to outgassing, though none was detected. So basically they said, oh yeah, it's spinning through space. It decided to turn itself into a rocket while it did that. Are you out of your friggin' mind?
It probably bounced through a double layer. It probably hit a spot where the magnetic field was totally different because of some sort of like a double layer magnetic field.
No.
And then it experienced a massive potential difference, and it probably physically jumped a bit, and then they probably kind of lost it, and they saw a cloud of dust. It was probably something pretty basic.
Oh, I would just automatically assume that it had it was going faster on the way out simply because it's a charged body and it's quite highly charged, and now it's going out. It's not discharging because it's not crossing a lot of what's called magnetic field lines. It came from a much higher angle. If it was coming in along the elliptic, it would be crossing more. But as it might have picked up energy as it went by it. As it's getting pushed away, like, hello, you're a different charge, piss off, type of thing.
Anyway, the implications of time dilation in terms of what if you could teleport to a different galaxy, if you could teleport to a galaxy, with a watch that was synchronized to mine, and you could teleport to a different galaxy, and that one's moving toward the alleged point of the Big Bang. If that galaxy is moving toward and ours is moving away, your clock should have vastly different time elapsed if time dilation is a thing, because it's got to work in both directions. If you can slow down time by speeding up, you must be speeding up time by slowing down.
You don't get something for nothing, and I still think it's just mathemagic.
Yes. Yeah, it is. I'm not suggesting that it's real, but this is a theory that's been going on for 20 years. And you want to talk about some blank looks and guys trying to figure out if they're going to be able to write a paper based on this.
I would rather just make up a whole fictional sci-fi universe than that. I mean, at least I have more control over it, and it's going to be equally compelling. But I don't have any. I can actually publish this when I'm done. But anyway, no. But
anyway, the point is, you could make a probe, Neil. You could make a probe and fly it toward the point of the Big Bang, right? So if all the galaxies are all emanating from this single point where the Big Bang allegedly happened, that means that if you fly a probe toward that, you're going to be reducing the radial velocity,
where that is.
Which means the clock should speed up. And as soon as you turn off of that vector, the clock should slow down again. And then as you turn back on that vector, the clock should speed up again, right? It should be a very simple thing to measure without even having to go Parker Solar Probe speeds. But if you can go Parker Solar Probe speeds, then more power to you. It'll be a really extreme measurement that either proves or utterly disproves time dilation.
So
I have a question for you guys.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
We're having fun here. Since you asked a question, let's send it towards the center of the Big Bang. Well, so we'll use redshifts and calculate where the center of the Big Bang problem is. So this is what they show you. Red space. Well, here I'll go back one because I said red space distortion because the fingers of God problem. That's the first thing that popped up in Wiki. This is what you see. You don't know what the hell that is. What does that mean? You read a bunch of this crap. You don't know what
microwave background.
Whoa. Do you think I'm doing that? No. Relax.
Not the cosmic microwave background.
Shush. So I click on this to understand what the hell they're talking about, and I see a picture of this. And I'm like, interesting. But in actuality, it didn't answer my problem, which was, what was this, the fingers of God problem? Because I knew the answer to this problem. So if you go and look at the images instead, and I mean cosmology. Let's put cosmology in there because I don't want any baby pictures. Man. There we go. So here's one.
Thank God you have safe search on.
I know. Well, so
you would have found the finger.
Here's another. Right. Yeah, I know. Here's one right here. Here's another image right there. That's a really good one. So this is all the redshifts lined up, pointing towards this spot here. This is the center of this is us, by the way. So according to what they can calculate, because
we're the center of the universe.
We are the center of the universe according to redshift, because everything's flying away from us at really fast speeds and goes in groups away from us.
Well, the Big Bang must be our fault then, I guess.
It is, clearly, because I think it's because of global warming and the fact that we're driving cars that's causing this.
CO2 is very expansive gas.
Expansive gas, and it's affecting everyone. And I think that we should all get arrested for climate change. No, okay. All right. Anyway, but you get my meaning. We'll see what happens. Yeah, exactly. But you get my meaning, and I didn't mean to mock it very harshly, but because obviously being kind to your environment's a good thing, but the carbon tax idea is stupid. So right here, though, you can see these are basically all the redshifts, and they're all pointing in lines towards us, which means that either we are the center of the universe.
Horseshit? Is that what it means?
Or the measurements are horseshit. But they never show it to you. If you go looking for it, do you know how hard it was for me to find it? Even if I type in fingers of God problem, it doesn't show up.
The signal to noise ratio is like 1.5 to 1 on that. If you saw an image of what a 1.5 to 1 signal to noise ratio looks like, you might as well hold your hand in front of your face.
Oh, you're talking about CMB. That's not CMB, obviously. This is just the redshift survey, basically marking down the redshift of each thing, and they notice everything travels in lines away from the Earth. That's what they noticed.
They're really measuring. They're measuring the microwave emissions of every freaking star and galaxy in the entire universe,
and putting it in plots,
suggesting that it's all the same all the time, and going, I don't know why we can't repeat the cosmic microwave background. It's because every galaxy is variable, idiots. Therefore, you're not going to measure the same radio frequency or unipolar signal. It's completely, I don't know, how did they come up
all
with
the atoms in the ocean change.
Oh yeah, that's the CMB, but this is not that, by the way. It's not CMB. This is redshift only. However, just for an interesting point, if you look at this redshift map, this is also the same type of thing. These right here are things inside of our own galaxy. These are galaxies, the red, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Everything else is different layers of quasars, but notice how they're in layers, just plotted like it's bands as well. So this means that there are,
I don't know
well, just like there's cloud layers on Earth, there are bands probably around in shells around our galaxy, around our local group, and so forth. So this is a more and more fictional and spread out than they actually are. These quasars are not really there. They're all part of down here. We can't see anywhere past this red, probably. So this is what I'm saying. We are making that shit up and putting all this out there when it's actually all down here. Much closer.
The Vatican loves that idea.
What do those colors represent, though? I don't think that represents red and blue shift, because the farther object should be farther red shifted.
No, it doesn't. I'm assuming, and please understand, I could be wrong here, but these are basically showing that shouldn't be happening. These are examples of things that just can't be. I mean, that can't happen.
Read the title, Sloan's Digital Sky Survey, mapping of the nearby galaxies and distant universes.
So if you look here, if you see everything is very stretched out, facing towards the Earth, being the center of this graph. And that just means that we exploded, which is stupid, obviously. So what matters is that everything is pulled back into its apparent distance, its apparent brightness, and will be in a much better look. Basically, quasars are probably, as ARP said, new, and they just look like they're far away, but they're around and birthed from nearby galaxies. And that's what we are.
Well, we see physical connections between the two, right?
Well,
so
obviously,
they have to
but
be...
this shows you an example of what you were talking about. You were trying to ask that question. This is why they would never tell you where the center of the universe is. Because if they calculate it, it's us. And they don't want you to know that. And I'm sure that there are people who are astrophysicists who are studying this. In fact, I know of it because I know there was an astrophysicist that he was on his 5th year. He's going to become a doctor of astrophysicist. And I said, do you know about the fingers of God problem? And he was like, what? He had no idea that this existed. He's on 5 years, 1 year into a master program, and he had no idea that the center of the universe is here, and we exploded everything outwards, according to their science.
Case in point.
Yeah, you're looking through a magnetic field, through a magnetic field, through a magnetic field, and the farther away the object is, and the more things in the foreground, and the more poloidal fields you're looking down, and so on and so forth, the more distorted your image is going to look. I mean,
there could be any number of reasons. ARP thought it was electron density. There's an idea that these new currents, these new galaxies being birthed as plasmoids, don't have a lot of mass, but through Markland convection begin pulling mass together, and literally, because the stars form, start making heavier elements because these plasmoids are burning, and there's not a lot of stars in them at the beginning.
And they're blasting proton beams all the time. So
yeah,
the reason a quasar is a quasar is just because of perspective. It's just it's an active galactic nucleus, and you're looking right down the barrel of it closely enough. I mean, if this thing is a million light years away, it's sending a proton beam. I would assume the galactic jets coming out of active galactic nuclei are very similar to the jets coming out of the north and south poles of the sun, which means that there's a constant cosmic wind, which is 90% protons, and every time it spits out a little pulse, there's gonna be a string of electrons following that, and as that goes on over time,
each pulse could become a quasar, yes, and become a new galaxy.
And there are some things that are very far away that have figured out a way to get those protons all the way inside of your brain. And I'm not being facetious, I'm being very literal.
Well, I do know that technically I am getting hit with cosmic radiation, yes. Technically.
I mean, Cygnus is high in the sky right now, and you can measure the 4.8 hour periodicity of Cygnus under 1,000 feet of granite. So even if you're under 1,000 feet of granite, it's still getting some protons directly to your head. What's it doing to the sun's poloidal fields? If we're able to measure it that well from Earth?
Well, thank God it's not pointing towards us.
It's exactly pointed toward us, and it's about
the poles. I mean, that's down the barrel.
The solar poles.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but put it this way: there are a lot of things affecting the sun's poloidal fields, and I'm pretty sure that's where its activity comes from. Not down here where the plebes live on the ecliptic.
Oh no! Well, no. We can actually see we can actually see the spherules coming out of the sun from the top and bottom.
And the question is, where do they go?
Well, obviously they connect to the heliopause, which is where we see a fire in the heliopause now, which itself is connected to this big friggin' Birkeland current, which we're sort of stuck to the side of, which is going up this chimney, which is now connected to all these stars, which is, of course, lined up with Sirius, which blah, blah, blah. Thank you very much, everyone.
And it has nothing to do with the galactic current sheet because it's very, very far away from that.
Well, the arms are more twisted than a sheet,
propagating the spiral arms.
Although it does behave like a sheet because those arms are linked. Both sides of those arms are linked together just as much as the arms are linked to the things in them. Like they are practically solid, the way that this it's just like the ballerina skirt, except that the ballerina skirts in this particular case are twisting arm snakes.
Oh, yeah. And that brings us to the swastika. That's why the swastika is a thing, because everything forms at 90-degree angles. You get these jets, and then you get a thing rotating, which is at a perpendicular angle to that axis. And then you get, the Hall effect, all that sort of stuff. That's all plasma cosmology. Just like the swastika. Are we going to get banned from YouTube now?
I don't know. How many times we say swastika?
Okay, so you guys ready for my question now?
I didn't say
yes, I'm sorry. Please go.
It's okay. No, it's fine. I'm thrilled to listen to what you have to say. It's fascinating. But my question is this: is there a connection between the time dilation that you're talking about that happens when we travel theoretically at the speed of light and the longevity of the ancient kings in the king lists? We see these kings living for, 2,700 years, 1,800 years, 3,200 years, whatever the number was, obviously beyond the human lifespan. Is there a way that we can explain these lengthy reigns with using time dilation, i.e., these kings traveled off planet at light speed and came back, 1,000 years later, unaged? Kind of a deal. Does that make any sense? Am I?
That sounds like it makes some sense. Yeah. If they left on a spacecraft,
well, then it's obviously true, and I'm right.
It would be hard to measure. Like if time dilation really works that way, if you could travel very close to the speed of light, it would be hard as hell to measure how much time was going to elapse in the location where you left while you came back. Like you could screw up
unless you had some technology to manage it.
Yeah, but if you. It could still be you can only go one way and not the other, which means 1 billion years could elapse, in which case it would be a shitty day when you got back home.
Yeah, okay.
Assuming
so controlling the amount of time would be the issue. Thing.
Michael,
yes,
I have
ma'am.
a little.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a little
speed of light,
about that.
More extreme it would be,
I hope you would, Tess.
Yes. Well,
I think Tess might have an even dreamier voice than Neil.
Well. I think it also had to do with the year. What they said it was a year was different. It wasn't like our year now because we were in a different place. And we were traveling through space through the solar system, not space, the inside of the solar system for a long time. And the pre-diluvial kings, if that's who you're referring to, allegedly they actually had very long lifespans until 2100 BC if you take the time of the Testament and the length, count Abraham as being one of the descendants of Noah. Noah would have been the 10th of the kings of the 10 that you're thinking of, which matches all of the other 10 Berosus, Manetho, or all the Chinese. Everywhere in the world there's 10 kings lists, and that also includes Adam, if you count the first, that's the first patriarch. They call them patriarchs. So there was 9 before the deluge, and then there's a few after that until Abraham. And then they said the lifespans got shorter and shorter and shorter. But I think it was also because we were not only that they lived longer, which could have been because we were, if we were allegedly inside of the plasma sheath, the red plasma sheath, then there was no bacteria and no viruses allowed to, they could not thrive, they couldn't reproduce because we were talking about that, the red infrared lights actually kill, they don't, it's not that they kill, but the bacteria and the viruses cannot reproduce. And so that would have been probably one reason why they would have lived longer. And one thing that I read, and we've talked about this, according to the Atlanteans, the Heliades, people in the Heliades, would actually live up to 150 years, which is not very long. But then they would take something to die peacefully when they reach that age for some reason. And then the other reason maybe was such a long lifespans.
There is no sanctuary.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Would be the length of the the length of the year, that because we were not around the sun until probably 200 BC with an orbit that could be calculated then. And I think that's really what the combination of those two things could have been why they live longer. And maybe they did have some technology to keep them healthier.
Yeah, well, all plausible explanations. Obviously, what I'm proposing is
yes, that's just
a wild outlier for sure. But it's just something that's been on my head for, just like one of those things in the back of your head that you think about, but then don't ever really give much thought to. But it just came up, and I thought, God, I wonder what these guys would think. I mean, it's plausible. Like you say, there are a lot of other more rational explanations, but interesting ideas.
Time, yes. Well, that's interesting to know, because time is all relative, right? Like you were saying, if you get out of the solar system, what are you measuring your time against? How are you measuring time, right?
Yep.
So that's another good point to think about.
Exactly. Very important.
To
measure our time.
One question about the theory of no viruses and bacteria, though. How would humans have been alive with no bacteria? You'd have had a very bad digestion.
That is a very good point. Maybe bacteria to a certain point, yes, because if we are 90% bacteria and other
mitochondria,
so that's an excellent question.
I have a thought about that. I think that certain energies turn on these viruses. Not bacteria. Bacteria lives with us all the time. Bacteria and viruses are different animals.
But you can get an infection from bacteria when it overgrows, right? Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah,
maybe they were just in. Maybe they were just in balance. Now that you say that, thank you.
A virus is different.
They were in balance.
Different, yeah. So
guys.
That's a good point.
Maybe it took the energy of this solar system to start viruses working.
Guys, this is actually all discussed in The Electric Sky by Don Scott. And one of the things that happens, especially right now, there are solar bodies out there that are throwing like protons out from them that are actually able to hit the surface of the Earth. They're actually able to go through our shield. They hit this. Now, when we have outpourings of these ions, this can actually cause algae blooms, other things like that all over the Earth. There was obviously, we know that there were giant mushrooms in the past and other things like that. So we can envision that there are situations that have changed that cause more of these things to happen or less, depending. And they're obviously getting the energy and feeding off of these
the largest organism on the planet.
However,
Neil, the largest organism on the planet is mycelium right now.
You're proving my point, but it's also under the Earth mostly to shield itself from what we're talking about, because if we were in a coma that was inside of another planet and that particular planet had a much stronger field, well, we would be even more protected than we are now. And God knows, like Tess said, I don't know what that would mean. I really don't. This could happen. And so
it could be a mutation cycle that kicks in. For instance, you get different refractory versions of cosmic rays, different refractory versions of particle showers showing up because of different levels of magnetosphere, for instance.
Well, and probably we wouldn't have all these comets floating around predictably because Mars wasn't totally blasted to pieces at this time either. So.
I think it's just the different energies at the different photonic levels. The yellow light and the green light have a different energy frequency to them, and when they hit a dormant virus, it becomes active.
Well, I'm not arguing with you because I honestly do not know. It could be harmonics for all I know.
Shouldn't amplitude and frequency have something to do with it?
Well, but which way is the magnetic field going? Are we able to? Because there are images of the entire Earth being around a shield, like having a grid around it. We could see these tubes going around the Earth. This means that we were in the polar conjunction of Saturn. We weren't just attached to it. It was going around us because we have a magnetic field. It can do that. The other planets don't, so they would be hit directly. But we
were just an extension of Saturn's magnetic field.
Well, there you go. Just like it would extend.
Yeah, there would be Van Allen belts that surround both the entire thing, and it would be like a completely different magneto-hydrodynamic system. It would be The lines would be all crossed in the middle, and then there'd be different size magnetotail, different size bow shock.
Yes, and we would have them around we would have the rings around the equator, but at the same time we'd have a pole thing jutting out the both poles. But there'd be something around even that, sort of like a cage holding us in. But this would be
the coma of Saturn,
right?
Just like the plasma sphere that we have around the Earth now, there would be one that would be much bigger because Saturn's would be attached to it.
Well, yes, and it would be basically, it would have to go, if you think about it then, whatever is going from whatever star out there, it doesn't matter the sun or anything else, let's say some big Cygna B or whatever with blue star that's really big and it's sending out these very fast protons, but we'd have to go through not just our atmosphere, which is 2 meters of water shielding, but it would have the shielding the magnetic field of the Earth, but it would also be the magnetic field of Jupiter and its entire electromagnetic system. It's quite possible this charged particle...
And all the hydrogen above the water, yeah.
Well, no, I'm not even talking about that. But because this is a particle of hydrogen, technically. But this proton coming in then is a charged particle. It's going to get diverted by these currents and go, oh, I'm going here now. Fing, it's gone. It won't even stop here. I mean, because it was flying so hard, it was trying to avoid being affected by these particles because it's so diffuse now. But then, when it was on and you could see them, chances are it would just be grabbed a hold of it by the first magnetic field it went by and was like, zing, it's gone. It wouldn't even hit the Earth. So
or double layer that it hit.
Or yes, it could be pulsed right back out by our own double layer. You're right. So multiple things could be happening if the system's more powerful than it is now. Anyway, that's just a supposition. I could be wrong. I'm just trying to lend credence to what Tess was talking about, extended age and biology.
The proton would violently steal an electron and cause a big discharge of energy as soon as it encountered anything that it was capable of stealing an electron from. It would steal it, and then you'd get an ion would be created, and it would create, ionization pathway. Unless it get
caught in one of these currents, like I said, it has no choice to follow them if they're that strong. And there's a cage around the Earth, plus there's Saturn itself, plus Saturn was highly charged at the time. So I don't know the exact dynamics. I could envision that we had more protection back then. The only thing we had to really worry about is when we had to hide ourselves when these things started going ultraviolet and we started getting cancer and shit. Like
it should have been a much stronger geospace. If the Earth was in a polar orbit with Saturn, it must have been a massively more powerful geospace. So yes, much less cosmic rays should have gotten in. And by the way,
more radiation in certain case, but
what does that do to the geologic data? If X number 1,000 years ago, the magnetosphere was completely different because of a polar configuration. I'm not suggesting it is or isn't. I'm just saying the implications to what that would have done to cosmic ray flux would be extreme, I would imagine, if Saturn was just hanging out in the polar area.
There is a point to make here about that Holistic has been harping on us about not talking about chronology. Is Sean back now? Because you guys were having a wonderful debate.
Yes, I am. Because the call got dropped. Things got real crazy for me. Like,
it's okay, man.
Real crazy.
It was just that you guys were talking about it when I didn't want to stop you, and I just turned on the show, and that's what I thought this whole show was going to be, and then it didn't turn into that. So I would like to give an opportunity and in homage to our friend.
It did get recorded, didn't it? I think it was recorded. No.
Well, just a bit. But, I mean, as much as we could at the beginning, but he obviously will have to go back and listen to that. I want to bring this to, I would like to talk about some of the things about timelines you guys were referring to, specifically about the debate you were having regarding the quality of the timelines and what can be trusted.
I missed it all.
And he missed it all. Not that I want you to go over everything, but the relevant conundrums that you were having were speaking about whether or not we can accept certain parts of the timeline to be accurate was fascinating, and I didn't want to interrupt it. So I don't exactly know how to pick up from you three, but including James. And
I don't want to interrupt. Those guys know more than me.
I wanted to pick up something that I hadn't. My mic somehow got turned off, and I thought everybody was just talking over me. So what I wanted to put out is that the change in the Purple Dawn would have a certain effect on the coloration of the geological layers. It would look like a geological era, and when that changed or was affected greatly and made a big change, you would see it as a geological border. And during the border time itself, if it was an actual cosmic change of function, and it would allow things to come in that normally would not come in at all, and that could have a very interesting impact on the whole thing. Oh, gee, I forgot whatever else I was going to say. Other than that, I thought that the Chinese burying making lifelike forms of themselves and burying themselves was an interesting aspect I never thought about before, is when Tess was talking about the comets in the past. And the other thing is that when those kinds of change of cosmic function would occur, and they didn't have to be necessarily huge changes, they could be just small changes and changing the chemistry and the whatnot, it would make everything in the sky light up, because the potentials would be different again, and then they would, through time, they would diminish.
Yes.
Just as they are doing now.
The potentials would be a lot higher, as Neil has been pointed out a number of times. The pyramids would generate a lot of power if there were power generators. Thanks, James. Sorry.
It's
Sean
okay, I'm still here.
Yeah, Sean,
I'm
go
here.
ahead.
I actually went in my truck because my granddaughter's sleeping. They were like, "You can't be too loud." I'm like, "Okay." So I'll go outside. I mean, yeah. One of the things was reading Gunnar Heisen's arguments of chronology revision. He was a Velikovskian, but again, he, like myself, when I started reading Velikovsky's chronology revisions, was like, you just can't take 500 years off the Egyptian chronology and sink the Ipuwer papyrus, if you will, into the Exodus story. I didn't agree with that from the gate. I'm like, okay, just because I don't. But then when you just look at the archaeological record alone and put the history we have off to the side, the archaeological record will tell the story, not the history, not the historical records at all, not the retro calculating back to, 36,000 BC for a deluge or any of that coming from Manetho, Berosus, Strabo, Josephus, or anybody. Take it off the table and just look at the archaeological record and let that determine human history. And then take what we have with human history, if you will, and then slide China, we'll say 1000 BC, and Mesoamerica at 1000 BC. Slide that into Lynn Rose's chronology revision of about 1200 BC for the Bronze Age, and look how it syncs up, with the archaeological record of humans and languages and et cetera, so on. Just let the archaeological record speak for itself. Don't let what we've been told influence what is actually there. That's a very heavy level that, Professor Heisen is on, and he's received objections even from Duardo and Ev Cochrane about certain things, which is okay. But when you just look at the archaeological record, it's like, whoa. So again, I was tinkering with the chronologies, and I tinkered with them a couple different ways, and was like, again, I kind of got spooked out a little bit, and I don't get spooked out with anything. And I was like, there's a heavy implication that, the catastrophes of the past are closer to where we are now, and there aren't these gaps in history that are there. First intermediate period of Egypt, second and third, they took those off the table quick and resynced essentially the stratigraphic records of rulership in Egypt. And it looks like, these kings and kingdoms were ruling more simultaneously together from about that 680 BCE period, which is why that's used as a historical reference point in the first place. That really going back past that, it's always been conjectured that that's really speculative in the first place. Well, it is speculative because it wouldn't go back that much farther in terms of human history, languages, development of civilizations from where we are right now. And then even the, we'll say the Anglo-Saxon period meshes more, and even Irish, culture meshes more with the BCE chronology than we actually even think it does. So it's just like a mind-blowing way to look at things just based on the archaeological record. Depths, are there settlement gaps? Are there wind blown materials between, let's say, ancient Sumeria and Acadia, the Hyksos, Assyria, the Greeks, up through that period of time? The answer from Gunnar Heisen is emphatically no, not at all. It looks like things happen more recent without the historical gaps, and the historical record from, again, Manetho, Berosus, et cetera, is just unreliable in itself. That's a heavy, postulation that Gunnar Heisen has put forth. And just for me looking at it, I'm like, whoa, they're still mind blown. Like, wow, that could be the case, and that, taking out the solar induced dark age of Robert Schoch from the dries of 9700 to 3100, we'll say, Bronze Age start, take that out the middle, put it together closer. There are some really, really serious implications on the table according to what we can show and prove versus what we're being told is the story, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? And we can kind of go from there and talk about it, whatever, what have you.
Are you talking about the compendium that started in 2254 BC, before the Common Era, is the starting point? Because that's one of the revisionists.
Yeah, what Heisen is saying, is if you look at Velikovsky's chronology revision in itself, he's saying the evidence of the chronology revision, even from his point, is not accurate. He's saying that it was Berosus and Manetho that stretched the timeline out in the first place. And then it goes way, 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 way back. But if you just look at the Bronze Age timeline, it was the Mesopotamian timeline and Egyptian timeline that was inconsistent with the Greek timeline, because the Greeks didn't say their culture was that much older than everybody else's. Berosus never mentioned Sumeria. There's just a lot of contentions within that. And when it was dug up, it completely conflicts with, Berosus, Manetho moving forward. The whole thing conflicts with the whole historical story we have right now, even including, from Rome through the Dark Ages up until about, we'll say, 9th, 10th century AD. That there's a conflict in the whole thing. I personally think that he got the CE chronology down pat, because we had talked about that months ago, about the Justinian plagues and the common events of, we'll say, 525, 530 CE.
Right.
That could have very well been 200 CE. And then if you, again, take the chronology from Egypt from 3100 BCE and slide it forward to about 1200 BC, and out of Mesopotamia, it squashes the timeline together. And it's like, that's just based on the archaeology alone, not with the stories. And it's like, okay, I'll consider that. And like I said, I took the solar-induced dark age from Dr. Schoch away from 3100 BC going back to 9700. And that's when I was like, Michael, wait a minute. Like, this could be the case. To where, let's say, realistically, let's say if the Göbekli Tepe Sphinx age was 10,000 BC. From that point, and let's say that that's the polar configuration Saturnian system stability, there could only be realistically about 3,000 years from that point, the major catastrophes that people were remembering, to where we are right now. And that's why I was like, damn, there could be that could be the case. And that either one or two, a couple of things we don't want to remember. We don't really want to deal with it. Historians, again, were recompiling history and screwed it up. I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play at that point. You know, retro calculating, we can argue that it does or doesn't work. I say it doesn't work, especially from doctorate and master degree thesis and dissertations I've read, where people were like, okay, let's test. You know, let's just keep counting backwards with the way our solar system works. We can pinpoint where everything was during the time the Deacon's astronomical ceiling was compiled. And many people have tried it, and many people have failed at it. Nobody successfully just retro-calculated right back to that date, time, or date, year. It becomes like real super duper screwed up.
I have a clue for you, Sean. I have a clue for you, Sean.
Go ahead.
Dendrochronology is the only way that we can safely try and figure out dates. And guess what? Dendrochronology only goes back as far as 11,000 years ago.
Right, I know that. It doesn't go back that far. And then
that was the time of the breakup and the Purple Dawn gone and the Golden Era and all of that stuff. And that's when everything changed. One of the major events happened at that time.
Well, just like I asked Michael Armstrong, I said, now he's older than me, and me and Rick are close to the same age, and a lot of us in this group. Who came up with the 10,000 and 10,500 BC date in the first place? And he was like, I don't know. And it's like, well, okay, we're given that date, and then we can use, that, and we'll say tree ring dating, but then we're still assuming radiation levels are all the same, and everything's just kind of growing slowly and growing the way it's going to grow, and this is old and this is that old. It becomes a conundrum almost. Like, okay, I hear what you're saying.
First, it had to mutate to this new environment. Then it
had to adapt. Sure.
Yeah, and I have something to say about that, which is really it fits in with what you're saying. The 11,000 or 12,000 years of Atlantis, which now you're saying it needs to be revised. I completely agree, because it needs to be revised, because they based everything either on mainstream science, which says that the ice sheets have been there unmoved for millions of years, which it's impossible, because when we came out from the red dwarf, I hear some noise there. Please, somebody.
That was a train. That was a train.
Oh, the train. Oh. Okay, so when we came out from when we were inside of the red dwarf or brown dwarf, the ice can't build up, and that's a fact. It just, the way the red, it's again, the infrared light,
evenly heated planet, yep.
The heat bounces everywhere, and it gets warm everywhere, so the ice doesn't build up. There's no way. So even if it's 12,000 years ago, or let's say, according to Velikovsky and his research, the geological research, there was several ice sheet movements because Earth's axis shifted, and you can see that in the pyramids, in the alignments with build reps. But his time is, I don't agree with his time because of the ice precisely. So let's say the ice either was formed in 12,000 BC, okay, and then you calculate forward. It could definitely never be the same age as what they say it is, because the ice was just brand new. And then if you consider Velikovsky and the geological, but by other people too, that the ice has the poles, the ice caps have moved, then the last time, well, according to Velikovsky and the ancients, because of the climate changes also, and the mammoths that they have been finding, or the woolly mammoths that they've been finding in Russia and Antarctica, it moved 3,600 years ago, and the latest 500 BC, as late as that. So all that goes away. You can't go by that. And then the endocrinology, like Rick is saying, definitely is a good option. But then the other problem is that a lot of alternative people are using Plato, dating Plato's timeline as 9,000 years, right? Which is what he says.
Not endochronology, dendrochronology.
Yeah, dendrochronology. Yes, it's the tree rings. But if you see that all the ancients were using, they didn't have the sun to go around, to count, to calculate time, which I forgot to mention also, with the time spans of the ancient kings and they call them immortals, but that was really the planets. But the kings that were living longer, they were not counting in years. They didn't have the sun to go by, or one steady planet, sun, star to go by, because Earth was moving like a comet through the solar system. So they had the moon. They had the moon,
sure,
to the Egyptians and to the Book of Enoch, which is the seventh patriarch. They had it since then, and they were measuring the time, and they called it years, but it wasn't a year. And they had three. Yeah, that's another way, but that's only according to the Sumerians, not to the Egyptians or the other people. They were using the Sothic cycle, which I put the links in the chat so people can look it up. And I put the lunar calendars as well. And the links where Manetho is stating, and even Isaac Newton also went and did a revision of chronology, which is interesting, Sean, because that's another person who says all the ancients are wrong in their measurements of chronology. The years should be shorter. And he wrote this book, which was published until after his death, interestingly enough. But anyway, so they are saying that there was no years. It was months, and they were called shars by the Sumerians. And they had the Sothic cycle in Egypt. And then Isaac Newton talks about that, how they used it from the 5th, I believe, the 5th to the 25th dynasty in Egypt, or something like that. But that's something that needs to be considered. And then you can't go, the 9,000 years of Plato matches perfectly with the sinking of, let's say, the Minoans, which is considered to be part of Atlantis, which is only between 1500 to 1000 BC. So that's kind of cool. It matches.
But it synchronizes perfectly with Pulse Meltwater 1b, though.
What?
It synchronizes perfectly with Pulse Meltwater 1b, which has been scientifically dated to 11,600 years ago.
By whom? Mainstream.
By the mainstream scientific community.
There you go. And that's the problem. It's mainstream.
Just a second. That view was only brought. I mean, you got to understand the dynamics of the flooding event in the early 1900s. This guy that thought up the flooding event, he was ostracized by the mainstream back then until they understood that there was massive flooding on the North American continent. So they actively, since the 50s, been trying to figure out when this happened. I don't think there's any kind of nastiness going on there at all. I think those dates are 100% correct.
Well, that's what you think, but there's other people that have come up with the floods in the Black Sea, which I can post the links, and they're scientists, and that's completely different.
That has to
timeline.
Be. Yeah,
so
that's like 3,500 BC. That's more like 3,500 BC.
Yeah, and then if you calculate Noah,
there's been many floods on this planet.
Yes, exactly. Definitely agree. And Noah, if Noah's flood, which is like the major one, there was one before Noah, by the way, that nobody talks about. The one previous to Noah, there was 2 floods during Helios, the time of the rule of Helios.
12,900 BC and 11,600.
No. Well, that's if you follow that chronology, but I follow a different one. And then you had Noah, who was 600 years old at the time of the deluge, and he was alive for another 600 years of the years that we have to figure out how really long was the years, because if they were not years like ours, there was a shorter time, which is interesting, because then what Sean is talking about, then it brings time to be very short. It's not years like 365 years as now. It was 30 days per year approximately, because the moon also varied its orbit with Earth. They talked about it. They talk about the moon getting dimmer and smaller and going away from Earth, but also the calendars show that there was many changes. All the calendar changes, they're not just because they couldn't figure out they were not bright enough, is because things were changing and the Earth was moving, planets were affecting Earth, all these interactions were changing its orbit and axis. So they had to keep changing the calendars, and that's why the Solking and the Nandera calendar and all these different calendars, the reason they're there, and the Chinese were coming up with all these different calendars, constantly trying to just keep up with the changes. And but what I wanted to say is that, let's say you're talking about Noah, and let's say that was one of the floods, right? Because we know all that was one of the floods. And then Noah had children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and they all had their children. And that's where the tribes and all the people that ruled the planet really descended from. They divided the planet amongst themselves, and there's a story, there's pictures of how they divided. And
because that's normal.
Yeah, exactly. We own it, so we're going to divide it.
And because we believe the Bible story.
No, that's not the Bible story.
No, that's just Noah.
Many different stories. You have it in the Hindu and the Atlanteans and the Mayans. They just call them that, different names. They were kings everywhere. So you can't deny that. They have people that rule over them. I mean, they talk about them. And then the Abraham, the line of Abraham. And he's not that far from, he could not be 12,000 years old compared to Noah. Just calculating from there, it just doesn't make any sense. So you have to acknowledge that. And if you don't, then that's a problem. If you just deny all the kings that have lived on the planet, forget about the Jewish and the Bible, forget about them. But all the other cultures of the planet have kings that have ruled over them, that control them. And it's written in all of their books and the bloodlines, and that's the bloodlines and their kings and their emperors. That's where they come from. And you cannot just say they're all made it up, because there have been kings everywhere written in old ancient texts from all the cultures.
I don't disagree with you.
Tess, I'm not saying they're making it up, Tess. What Professor Heisen is saying is they're reconstructing it also. Like, okay, that would make more sense. That they're reconstructing it. They're reconstructing it.
I definitely agree. I agree. I agree with the time has been taken very far back and really far, and everything is always taken very far back, so we can't always get a grip of it, right? We can't understand.
I mean, on the very radical end of it, I mean, Professor Heisen is really, really raw with this. And he said, he wants Samaria and Acadia to be completely taken out the textbooks. Completely.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's a stretch.
Because they would be the Assyrians and Chaldeans. You found the Hittites, you weren't looking for them. Nobody ever mentioned the Sumerians ever, but you found them, but you were looking for the Chaldeans. You never found the Medes either. You found the Persians, but never found the Medes. So it's like,
But how can you not find the Sumerians? You mean
because
the Sumerians?
What he was saying, what Professor Heisen's claim is that nobody mentioned the Sumerians ever. And when the archaeology was dug up, Jules Oper became obsessed with what he's calling now the Sumerians, that they were indeed the Chaldeans, and that they invented a newer culture that went back further that nobody at the time even ever mentioned. At the time, nobody even mentioned that. But it's not that much farther back.
Diluvian people, because I just
he's not even talking about that at all. He's saying that the Chaldean history. Now there's really no Chaldean history. It's Sumerian history. That the Sumerians are the Chaldeans, and that the Hyksos are the Assyrians. The Akkadians are the Assyrians.
Yes, they evolved into, exactly. With each catastrophe, they moved, they migrated, and then they started new cultures. That's what I have understood from the migrations. People, they get destroyed by the catastrophes, and they need to move to try to survive, and then they become other known cultures like the Assyrians, and that's
so what he's more or less proposing is that the way we understood it from the historical record prior to the excavations is the way it should be. and that we just have to look at the stratification, the depths, look at if there's, culture, if there's windblown materials that prove that there's periods of time between the cultures for us to really get an accurate look at, the Bronze Age, essentially. Just the Bronze Age, not antediluvian at all. Just the Bronze Age in itself. I saw the arguments and was like, shit, Professor Heisen may be right. I mean, he may be really right with what he's proposing.
One problem with the Roman archaeology or architecture that everyone around the world has talked about, when they go to Baalbek, they say, oh, that's the Romans came in and they built these. And everything is Roman. And I have to agree with some people that they say that's ridiculous. Or the Etruscans. They're the Etruscans. All of these comes from before the deluge, pre-deluge. All that amazing architecture, gigantic
There's a really good argument.
Leaves.
There's a really good argument for that, because one of the things I saw that I really liked was the frescoes. They said, these are Roman frescoes. Well, okay, then why do these frescoes happen to have Nordic people on them? If these are the Slavic culture, then this is a Roman fresco in like friggin' Sweden or something. It's up north, like in Bath or wherever, England. But these are all like not with people with black hair from Italy.
Yes, that's not Roman at all.
So,
it's Sumerian.
Well, why is
or
this?
Pre-Diluvian.
Well, whatever it is, it's certainly not just the conquered people enjoying it. The other, like, this was a culture. It's not unlike, if I was to be so bold, it's not. I don't want to say like the Christians, which took over and killed everything else. Maybe it's sort of like how commercialism, like the commercial culture of Hollywood, sort of like overtakes the planet like some sort of virus. And it will take parts of your culture and make it its own and go, no, look at our native headdresses. Dress like an Indian for Halloween. It's fine. And this type of thing, the cultural appropriation type of ideas, it happens everywhere. I'm not trying to be too picky here. But I picture that sort of like how Rome did, because they said that Rome, in many cases, some of the places that, like the places in Africa, were much bigger than Rome. I mean, the Colosseum in Rome was tiny compared to the Colosseum there. It could hold 250,000 people. And then they had, that was one of their cities in like the Northern Africa parts. And then there's other places where it says, well, what they did is they worked with the communities to like, they took over for the crappy government and basically came in and said, we got the money, we got the entertainment. Do you want to be in on this parade? Yeah. Hey, Rome, let's roll. And that's what they were kind of doing. And people were like, yeah, sure, that's cool. Like, as long as we can still farm, right? Because everyone was farmers. They're like, yeah, we could do. Okay, cool. I can still work. Yeah, okay. Because they didn't really mess with that too much. So they didn't want a really rebellious population. They wanted to basically occupy it for as little manpower as possible. And make money off of it to support the people back home, if whatever the home was, because we're having that debate right now. But what was this culture? How is this working? It's much more complex than we think it is. I think.
There's some other things too, like what's to say what they call Roman architecture. Let's think of aqueducts, and you see these things all across the planet. Why does it have to be Roman and not that everybody was doing things at that particular time the same way? Like, it didn't come from Rome, but the Romans and the Chinese and everybody was doing it that way at that point in time. Because the Starfort show blew me away. Like, whoa,
me
too. What I mean? Whoa. One thing, and then another thing, Tess, just to bring it up, one of Heisen's biggest points is that the older culture should never be on top and the younger culture be on the bottom of stratification ever. And that's in a lot of cases in Mesopotamia. Like, the Medes are on the bottom and the Sumerian stuff on the top. Like, it shouldn't be that way. Yeah. There's a lot of things we really have to talk about. He's probably the most radical of the Velikovskians, I would say. Like, wow. Like, wow, you took it to this level to, you know, not so much disprove Dr. Velikovsky, but to say, okay, I'm inspired by it, but what other evidence do we have to really nail this thing down? And I'm like, wow, he's one of the titans, I would call it, of that whole, you know, Cronia movement, to where I'm like, damn, yeah, it has me looking at stuff. It has me definitely, you know, spending my time really looking into his work, like, and, you know, the actual evidence we have versus what we've been told in terms of the past, you know. So
yeah, well,
that's what really.
And,
what's that?
I'm going to do more research about it. I think
the books,
I think I read
they're available on PDF, and somebody posted them. I thought it was James Conway, but maybe it wasn't. Somebody came into the group like May of last year and gave us like 5 gigabytes of books and said just keep them within the group. And I was like, okay, cool. So I downloaded all the books, and
I'm glad
some
you
of them
did.
already had. Yeah, some of them already had, and there's 5 gigabytes of book. Michael even sent me a not fire
that
stick.
That was Tim Mobley that did that, by the way.
He sent me a couple memory sticks and said, like, copy them for me. And I was like, okay, cool. But like a lot of the books I had, and the Charles Jananthal books that were published through Mi'kmaq, Pillars of the Past, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're thick. They're 500 pages. Some of them more. He really outlined all this. Is what he was doing in a book was showing you that these are the arguments that go back, you know, to the 70s with the Velikovsky group, and this is Heisen's end of it.
Yeah, like, that was Tim. Yeah, that was Tim Mobley. So you have that information.
Like, shit.
Okay, how can we figure out how big that is?
Books are in there.
Figure out how big everything. Well, that's only 5, but plus yours and a bunch of others. I want to see if we can get all this. Because one of the things I was wondering is what could we do for patrons if they wanted to do something, or people who wanted to donate something? We could give them literally a flash drive and mail it to them, you know, with all this on it, because it's a lot of information. I mean, we could throwing it up on the internet. We're not web producers. Maybe someone can do that when they get a hold of it. I'm not trying to make money off it. Trust me. Just if people are wanting, like, we could probably get little flash drives and then give them out to people if that's something people will be interested in. But we have to see how big it is first. I'm not dedicating this to anyone. This is just thinking about it. Okay. So
right.
Anyway.
That's quickly how me and Michael Armstrong met, because the Charles Jananthal books I had them on PDF, and I've been suggesting to people to buy the books. Then all of a sudden there were no books available, and I said, well, I'm going to call Mi'kmaq Publishing and see if there's more books. You know what I mean? Like in hard copy, because I know guys that just want hard copies, and that's how me and Michael hooked up. And
well, yeah, that's what
conversation we had.
I figured there might be people like out there who would go, you know, that would be really nice. I mean, and we'll look into this, guys. We'll see about it. I mean. And by the way, we're not the type of people who, if you said, I don't really have the money or something, I'm not trying to make anything off it. We'll give it to you anyway. I'm not that kind of person. So this is for everyone. As long as we're legally allowed to, you know.
I just want to say that I wasn't the one that made it available to.
Yeah,
it was Tim. He came on for a bit there.
Yeah. It's because you're an old head, because it was one of the elder members.
Ivan Trestman, he has a CD that has most of this stuff, of the old stuff, all the old stuff, and it might be in part with his stuff, and I just wanted to say that. What we really need is something in the middle to date, like in the Younger Dryas era, something that we can kind of put solid so that we can start saying, well, this happened before and this happened after, so that we can start building a technology that makes some sense that we can all agree on. I mean, I'd love to know when Grand Canyon was dug out, or in a second or so, or when the Grand Canyon of Mars happened. That would be great information. I'd love to know that. But until we start building a chronology, and having a particular date that we can just say we can all kind of agree on. This happened in the middle.
Right.
And we're not gonna be able to build much or agree with much.
Something. Yes. Because, well, I'm afraid that we might never be able to agree, but that's okay. I think yeah, I mean, we have to be realistic. We all have, like James said, we have our core beliefs, our subconscious beliefs, and then we just click with whatever fits subconsciously, probably, and we believe that. So I'm not saying anyone believe what I said or disregard what James or Sean or anyone, even the polar configuration people. They can all choose. But I think there's so much information, and somebody's asking about Tartaria, by the way, which might be interesting to talk a little bit about it just for a few minutes, because somebody has been mentioning this before in the chat, and we never talk about Tartaria. I can give you my 2 cents.
Oh, no problem. Keep going.
But what I was going to say is that we have to be, well, what I have found out with the chronology and in theories, even like from the flat earth, Tartaria, the guy you're talking about, Sean, or everything, just everything that is out there. There is so much information and so much, or the mud floods.
Yeah.
And everything is so, people are so confused, and there's so much information out there. It's like information
the entire
overload,
world just got cameras.
Overload.
I mean, literally in the last 10 years, every single phone, 20 years, every single phone on the planet has a camera. And now they're walking around taking pictures of everything. Like every single year, there are more pictures taken each year than there have been in the entire history of all the other years combined in the past. Think about that. There's
and
each year.
There's information overload, right?
Yes, completely.
The information is not controlled like before, but then there's also a lot of, I think, a lot of disinformation out there to confuse people. There's overload, so people don't know what's true, what's not true. I guess we will never know really what is true because we weren't there.
100% agree.
The most important thing.
There, so we can just throw our best guesses and with respect, like people were saying, and see the pattern. And I agree. With respect, you put out there your ideas, and I guess we just share at least what we are thinking or believing or our hunch. But we're never going to be able to say, this is what happened, this is the correct timeline, and this is the way it is, because we don't know the motives of people behind, or the knowledge, or if they know about the amount of catastrophes that occurred in each place, if they're calculating it correctly.
Exactly.
If they know
how big
who
is it? Yeah,
built buildings. Is the Romans? Was it the Etruscans? Was it the Pre-Diluvians?
True.
Who built it? Yeah, right. It's just so confusing, but it's good to talk about it because otherwise we cannot just.
That's why I'm saying what I'm saying, Tess.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying because, I mentioned it in the back chat, especially with mythology. Let's plug the planets in and see what deities are the planets. Because you guys were having that discussion, and I'm like, I've seen it from Grazia, I've seen it from John Cook, I've seen it from Talbot, I've seen it from Velikovsky, Ev Cochrane. With linguistics, and it's like everybody has it a little bit different. Rick said that in the back chat too before. Everybody does, and it's like what's his name? Ted Holden.
Yep.
And his homies.
Or let's have it without the color configuration.
Damn.
Too, right?
Yep, I've seen that too.
Let's see it all the ways how it could work, not only one way or another.
That right there, what you've just struck on is the key for me. The most important thing is if we can just get the people to go, hey, see this stuff here, this plasma?
Sure.
It exists in space.
Sure.
Electricity or some form of the rules of electricity do exist in space. Going from that forward changes everything because suddenly space is not empty. If we can just move from that point, we're really much further ahead. But you're right. With regards to reconstructions, there are some that seem too compelling. For example, the sumo wrestling thing. You don't get that unless you get two big planets trying to put each other in the sky. That seems very compelling to me. The Clash of the Titans story, very compelling. I mean, it is impossible to ignore that these two gods were fighting. It seems that way anyway. Now, that they wrote about because they thought, no, we were not being judged. This was just happening up there. But when it was happening to them, such as, yeah, those guys were really evil and they did really evil things to angels, and they wanted to do really other things. So that's Sodom and Gomorrah, and God blew them up. And that was it, as you would say. So I can agree with that point. There's a group think in there. There's a protection of your own morality. There's so many things being played with there.
Yes, and I was going to say really quickly about Tartaria before I forget. I'm sorry, James.
I'm looking for it. I'm sorry.
I'll let you talk. Tartaria.
Yeah, James wants to get in it too. I want to say one more thing after Tess. Go ahead.
Timeline
so
people.
What I know about Tartaria, and people were asking, do I believe, or anyone in here believes in Tartaria? What I have found out about Tartaria is that it definitely existed. It's on the maps, of course. And what it seems to have happened is that a lot of people died during my research. So, like I said, I just mentioned how many hundreds and thousands of people are dying here and there from pestilence, from the calamities, whatever, the earthquakes, floods. That probably what they're talking about is that the Romans, of course, in the 1600s, took basically over, and they were, the Roman Empire took over because people were dying, since before, of course.
Right.
But I think that's a time that they're referring to where they erased Tartaria out of the map, and they said Tartaria doesn't exist and Rome is everything. And it's because they're competitive bloodlines of kings, and which they're really like cousins. They're really, all the elites are really cousins, basically, but they always have been fighting, which is very sad, but it's kind of funny, actually.
There was an idea behind it, if I might be so bold, and it's very short, that they were, Romans were very into temporal power, and the Tartarians were sort of like old school thinkers that weren't into, like, this is just land, this is just ours, this is just, like, this is an empire, and we'll defend it, but we're not, it's like the Mayans getting tricked by the what are the conquistadors type of idea, where the people who wanted something, they knew it was valuable and they were going to take it. They're not sharing. Sharing.
They took it, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Took it. They said you have no soul.
Exactly.
They said that. Did you know that? They said that the Indians, all the Indians, when they went to conquer the world, they said the Indians or the natives had no soul, and the women had no soul at that time. The women had no souls. That's why the women were not allowed to be in church or I mean, it was, imagine that. Yeah, you're like an animal. Animals have no souls.
Why?
The Indians have no souls.
Did we allow women to think that they had souls? I mean, that was the worst idea ever, apparently. Like, I mean, seriously, you can see the levels of control and how they were justifying things with their religion. It's very sick when you think about it. And of course, but when you think about what Rome was doing, or the ideas around Rome, they were the heights of avarice, kind of what we're at now. So, false morality and morality by punishment of death is even worse. Like, I mean, so there's no merit in this except for control. Think about it. They got you.
So do you agree that the Romans basically came and just to kill the people that didn't want to, the Tartarians, which had different gods, of course, and if they didn't convert, they just kill them, like people have done to each other when they don't convert. Do you agree that that's basically what happened with Tartaria?
Romans were really
what you found? Well, the Roman Empire, the Roman, not the Romans as in the 700s BC or even 400.
I gotcha.
Like the Roman, like Catholic Roman Church.
That's a different ballgame.
Which is like the, it's like the.
I actually think it's before that. See, I think that we took the Roman Empire and we labeled it. Like there's a really, I like the word czar. Because, and I like the term
Tartaria then,
because it was czar, and then of course, what do we call the guy who runs Rome? We call him Caesar or Caesar, depending on right. Mm-hmm. So he's a vice czar or someone who rules an area. Now, after that, and it could be a large area. Don't get me wrong, and there could be, and he had to go all the way. Like they're marching armies in places, so they're out doing things, and obviously things were very chaotic, especially after. But at the beginning, there was like the Etruscan Empire sort of collapsed, and I think that might be the Tartars, like the whole thing, and they just walked in and took everything. without much of a fight, and it seemed to go all the way to China. But
the
Romans
dying
didn't.
As well. There was a lot of death.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. There was something happened. I don't know what, but I do recall there was this time when they talked about the green fog that came over the mountains in China, and if it touched you, it killed you. Like,
yeah, well, yes.
So I have no doubt that there was stuff like that happened.
That's what I found. That's what I just wanted to convey to people. That's what I found during my research of the past 1,000 years. That a lot of people died, and the Catholic Roman Church, I guess, was just taking over. They were the lucky ones who were able to survive the people that didn't survive, and they just took over. They basically, like since Carthage, they just went there. The place was already destroyed. And they were just like, okay, we'll just settle here and try to rebuild. And I think that's what happened. But the people, I guess the Russians, or I don't know what exactly is the background. It must be.
Let's not dwell.
They're mad, and I understand.
Slavic,
I
maybe?
I would too if my whole empire was taken away. But that's basically what happened, in my humble opinion. Anyways.
I also heard, by the way, to be an equal opportunity crap disturber here, that if I'm not mistaken, the Russian government gave her $1 million to start doing stuff, I think.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yes, that makes sense.
Because it totally supports their rise to supremacy ideals.
Yes, yes.
And the rebuilding of the USSR type of feelings.
Yes. I mean, that's the story of the world, right? Politics is all about...
Of course. I wasn't... But the trouble is that I kind of like the ideas because of the fact that they do compel me to think about things, because there's so much brushing under the rug. I don't like that. If you see an enigma, you must go down that hole. Otherwise, you're not really investigating. You're just sort of looking around. Yes. That's my thoughts on that.
Nobody does that. Nobody does that, Neil. Everyone goes by what they hear on a YouTube video. Seriously, ask people, what is your research? Where do you do your research? On YouTube. That's not doing research. I tell everyone, go to my links, go to my ebooks. They're free. Everything is free. I don't charge for anything. I mean, I'm silly. Maybe some people think I'm dumb, but that's the way I'm doing it.
No, don't charge for anything.
And nobody's controlling me.
That's what I mean.
Thank goodness
I just find it interesting that no matter what system they use, basically the same number of people die. So it's mirroring the original experience, I think.
What? A lot of people died? Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. But people need to go and read. I mean, I know it's hard because people are tired. They get home and they just want to sit down and not maybe focus their eyes too much, but reading and critical thinking, it's the only way, and just making up your own mind. But of course, if they don't want to do that, they just want to sit there and watch a 20-minute video and let the information go sink in and believe everything they're being told, then that's on each person.
That's why I was trained. That's why I was trained in college from a teacher school, that we don't watch movies all the time because you can't learn from movies. Back in school, if they'd have showed movies all the time, us kids would have been like, yay, we're watching a movie. We're not in the books. It doesn't work that way. So I agree with you. I try to tell people that all the time. Mm-hmm. I came through communications programs, so I know this stuff. Like, that's why YouTube videos aren't for learning. They're for supplement. That's it.
Yes. Yeah. Just to bring people attention and get people attention, and then they have to go.